Chapter 43. Sun Qing touched the back of the green toad with his fingers before taking out a handkerchief from his pocket and wiping his hands. The poison of toads isn't strong, and it's fine to touch it with your hands. As long as you don't put it in your eyes or eat it, you'll be fine, Sun Qing continued. Ah, I see, Rinpoche said. He was trying to hold back his laughter, but he put on a serious face and said, "At that time, they told me that this kind of green toad is very poisonous and it would cause unbearable pain and itchiness. I have been very careful these few days. There are a few types of frogs that are very poisonous, but this one doesn't belong to them." Sun Qing nodded. He wasn't sure if the poison had started to react, but before he finished his sentence, he felt that his fingers were a little itchy. "I'm going to wash my hands," Sun Qing said and went straight to the washroom. There was a washroom in Papa Chen's office. Sun Qing went in for a minute and came out with a strange look on his face. It seemed like he was trying to endure something. "I'm sorry, this is called green toad, right? Although it doesn't belong to the few types of highly poisonous frogs that I know of, it is indeed poisonous. Moreover, it can poison people through skin contact. From the looks of it, the toxicity is not small." As he spoke, Sun Qing stretched out his hand. His entire right hand was covered in red dots from his wrist to his entire wrist. "I haven't seen any records of this green toad. It should be a frog that isn't in the records. It has a lot of research value. But before that, I have to go to the hospital. Before I leave, I have to express my joy to join this team." Sun Qing forced a smile and nodded to them. "Professor Sun, are you all right?" Papa Chen stood up and asked. Su Shan also walked forward to check on his hand. From the current reaction, it shouldn't be fatal. But since it's an unrecorded species, we can't rule out the possibility that it's a rare or even unseen poison. Rinpoche looked at Sun Qing in a daze. This person's reaction after being poisoned seemed to be a little different from ordinary people. No wonder he was a professor that was one level higher than a saint. The next level would be a martyr, right? Rinpoche started to admire him. Seeing that Sun Qing was about to leave, he quickly called out to him, "Professor Sun, I have the antidote here." Sun Qing turned to look at Rinpoche and said, "I guessed so too. Carrying such a rare and fast-acting poison, as long as one isn't stupid, they would bring along the antidote." Rinpoche's face twitched. He didn't know whether he should like or hate this person. Anyway, it was quite annoying to talk. He took out a small paper bag from his pocket. Inside was a kind of dried flower petal. "Crush it and soak it in water before applying it to your skin," Rinpoche said. "All right. You probably won't be able to use this thing, right? Then I won't stand on ceremony." Guiqingwen took out 2 flower petals and put the paper bag into her pocket. Rinpoche looked at his actions and didn't say anything. Sun Qing took a teacup and threw the petals into it. He then took out a pen from his pocket and used hot water to disinfect the tip of the pen. Then, he crushed the petals. He looked up at Rinpoche and asked, "Cold water or hot water?" Rinpoche shrugged. "I don't know. It should be cold, right?" Sun Qing took some out and wrapped it in a piece of paper. Then, he poured a small amount of cold water into it, stirred it, and wiped it on his hands. 10 minutes later, his hands were covered with red spots. It looked as though he had contracted some infectious disease. It was a little scary. Sun Qing suddenly said, "The pain and itch are alleviated to a certain extent. It's effective." He then added some water to the flour paste and rubbed it on his hands again. Sun Qing and Su Shan observed carefully. After another 10 minutes, the red spots on his hands started to diminish. "This thing is not bad. It's very effective. What kind of flower is it?" Sun Qing asked. "Ninewood flower," Rinpoche said. What other uses does it have? I'm not sure about that, Renbochin replied honestly. Sun Qing nodded and said to Papa Chin, it's worth researching. When will the research start? It can already be started. There are still some equipment that will arrive later. It shouldn't affect the early stage of the research, Papa Chin said. Following which, they talked about the research lab. Renbochin and Qin Qing weren't interested. After saying goodbye, they went outside to smoke. Papa Chin looked at Renbochin's back and smiled. This was to show that he didn't want to be involved in the future. Papa Chin was very satisfied with this performance. He was really afraid that Renbochin, who was young and full of vigor, would want to make a career out of it. It would be easy for him to get into trouble. Now that the research was successful, he would gain fame and status, and Renbochin would get most of the profits. Renbochin accompanied Qin Qing to smoke a cigarette outside. He hadn't smoked for a long time. After smoking half a cigarette, he felt a little dizzy. However, it still felt good. How about it? Do you want to go and play tonight? Qin Qing poked him and asked. Oh yes, I haven't asked. What's the situation between you and my classmate? Renbochin immediately thought of Dong Haiqing. What else could it be? Qin Qing spread his hands. I know she's your classmate. I sent her back that night and didn't even go upstairs. I'm most afraid of this kind of relationship. It's too troublesome. Where's Jiangnan? Let's have lunch together. I haven't seen her in a while since I've been running around. She should be at work. Let me make a call. After Qin Qing hung up the phone, he said to Renbochin, she's at the company. Let's go together later. Are you going tonight? Qin Qing asked again. It's still more fun with you around. There's no point in going alone. Am I your only friend? Renbochin asked with a smile. It should be easy for an influential person like Qin Qing to find someone to accompany him to go to the nightclub. You're the only one who can go out to drink and pick up girls. Qin Qing shrugged his shoulders. The two of them waited outside for a long time. When they saw Sun Qing and Su Shan coming out from the nightclub, they nodded at them. They went in to greet Papa Chin and went to look for Jiangnan. Papa Chin invited Renbochin to stay for lunch. However, Renbochin felt uncomfortable eating with him. He felt more comfortable eating with Qin Qing. After lunch, Qin Qing returned to the law firm. Renbochin went to buy 2 sets of clothes and went online at home. Now that the black mud cream's formula was settled, he could finally relax. As long as he waited for the black mud cream to hit the market, he would be able to earn a lot of money. He didn't have to worry about his future. He took the time to make a call home. Naturally, he was nagged by his mother again. In the middle of the call, his father took over the phone and asked him about the company he was talking about. In the end, he told him to be careful and not to be cheated by others. At night, he went to the bar with Qin Qing. At least he didn't return empty-handed. The girl that night was young, but she was very wild. After tossing and turning for half the night, when Renbochin woke up the next morning, his back was still sore. Looking at the snow-white shoulders that were exposed under the blanket, Renbochin shook his head. Both parties had a purely physical relationship. Of course, they couldn't be tainted by unbearable feelings. Naturally, there was no need to communicate. He put on his clothes and prepared to go home to catch up on sleep. Chapter 44. After surfing the internet for 2 days, Renbochin once again returned to that world. This time, he didn't bring anything with him. When he slept, he wasn't worried about leaving anything behind on Earth. When he woke up, the sky was already bright. He went out to see how the 2 little chaps were doing, but they weren't outside. There were bamboo leaves scattered on the ground and a puddle of water not far away. It seemed like they had just left. Renbocchen looked around and found the two little chaps outside a cage in the living area of the wild beasts. One of them was leaning on the cage and peering inside. The other one was rolling on the ground and continued to roll. Then, it hit its head on a rock. Renbocchen almost laughed when he saw the guy sitting on the ground in a daze after knocking down the rock. These two little chaps had familiarized themselves with the surrounding environment over the past few days. In addition, it wasn't too hot this morning, so they came out to explore. The one that had been rolling was Gun. It shook its head, ran behind Tian, and bumped its butt, causing Tian to tumble. The two pandas immediately rolled into a ball. Following which, the two chaps staggered and continued to explore. There was an extremely beautiful big bird in the cage just now and it didn't pay attention to the two chaps. The two little chaps didn't go far before they became interested in another iron cage. Renbocchen had an impression of this cage. Inside were two rabbits that were as big as dogs and had mouths full of fangs. When the two chaps went over, the rabbit pounced on them and hit the iron cage. It made a gurgling sound from its throat, scaring the two chaps into a ball. Renbocchen then picked them up with each hand and walked back. When he returned to the entrance of the house, he put the two chaps there. In the end, Tian hugged Renbochen's arm and didn't let go. It was as if it was glued to his arm. Gun also hugged one of Renbochen's legs and climbed up. Renbocchen managed to shake off the two chaps with great difficulty. After breakfast, he went to the fields to take a look. The 2 mu of land used for seasoning had already been plowed. A few odd job workers had nothing to do, so they plowed the sweet potato field again. Seeing this situation, Renbocchen called for 2 people to follow him back to the house to get the Sichuan peppercorns, sesame seeds, cumin peppercorns, and sprouted sweet potatoes to prepare for planting. Renbocchen couldn't help much with the planting. Ever since he was young, he had never even touched a hoe. Renbocchen told them about the cultivation methods that he had seen on the internet. The 5 odd job workers nodded their heads in agreement. They didn't expect that there were so many ways to cultivate. They looked at Renbocchen with admiration. As for the sweet potato, it was much simpler. This thing was very adaptable. It could dig a hole and bury it at a certain distance. In the first week, he had to water diligently to prevent the seedlings from dying. After the second week, it would be easier. Until the harvest, he only had to turn over the sweet potato vines a few times to prevent them from taking root. After settling these matters, Renbocchen dragged Tinghulu and Tai Dao to the blacksmith shop in Baishur district to check on the progress of his fan. Shop owner. Renbocchen entered the shop and greeted the shopkeeper. The shopkeeper looked up at him and took out a wooden box from behind. Inside the box were the fan and the custom-made one that Renbocchen had brought. Take a look. The shop owner stuffed the fan into Renbochen's hands. Renbocchen took a closer look. The fan blades were covered in layers of decorative patterns. It was obvious that they were forged with a hammer and looked rather beautiful. If the fan blades were to be sharpened, it could probably be used as a murder weapon. The bearing inside was also rather smooth. It seemed that there was no problem. Renbocchen took out a rubber ring from his bosom and attached it to a rope before pulling it. The fan started to spin as expected. Renbochen's hand that was holding the fan trembled a little. It seemed that the roundness of the bearing was not enough. However, he was already very satisfied with the workmanship. Good craftsmanship. Renbocchen gave a thumbs up and said, "Of course. My craftsmanship is among the top 3 in the entire Baishur district." After hearing Renbochen's praise, the shopkeeper immediately raised his head proudly. Renbocchen chuckled. "Just do as I said before and make another 20. The price is still 2 taels of silver each. How long will it take?" After hearing Renbochen's words, the shopkeeper revealed a smile. After thinking for a while, he said, 10 days. The main problem is that the thing inside needs to be polished slowly. Renbochin knew that the shopkeeper was talking about the bearing. 10 days was acceptable. He immediately paid the deposit and wrapped the 2 fans in cloth. Tinghulu and Tai Dao each carried 1 fan. After leaving the blacksmith's shop, they first went to Jingyuan Road to see how the most important shop was doing. When they arrived, they saw that the shop's door was wide open. 2 men were working inside. The bottom of the wall was covered with wooden planks. The top of the wall was covered with white ash. The floor was also covered with a layer of wooden flooring. There were also some chairs and wooden tables in the room. Everything was made of solid wood. All the wood was coated with a layer of sumac sap. It had a slightly pungent smell. However, this substance was completely environmentally friendly. Although the smell was a little pungent, it would dissipate in a few days. The coating of this layer of lacquer prevented the wood from rotting easily and also prevented it from attracting bugs. In this world, only furniture makers would add color to the sumac sap. However, Renbochin had completely retained the natural color of the wood. It looked fresh and natural, and it was comfortable to enter. After standing outside and looking around, Renbochin did not go in. Instead, he brought the 2 of them back to the beast park. After putting down the things, Renbochin pulled the carpenter Tong Jia into the beast park and whispered to him softly. Tong Jia was more than 1.8 meters tall. He had a shaved head and would bare his arms whenever he was free. His bronze-colored muscles were exposed and he looked more like a thug than a carpenter. However, he was a carpenter in the beast park. His main job was to repair the houses and beast pens. His craftsmanship was not very good and was barely passable. However, Renbochin had seen the things he made and felt that they were not bad. At least, this level of craftsmanship was not bad on Earth. Renbochin pulled Tong Jia and gestured as he whispered to him for a long time. At first, Tong Jia was at a loss. When he knew that they were going to make a box, he immediately said, "This is easy." Then, they gathered a pile of wood and started sawing it to make a box. The others saw that the 2 of them were acting mysteriously and did not know what they were doing. The 2 of them spent the whole afternoon making a box with a thin wooden grid in front. They placed the fan in the box and stuck it. Then, they made another box and drilled a row of small holes at the bottom. Then, they put the cloth through the holes and fastened a button. Renbochin put the box into the box and wiped his sweat. For the whole afternoon, Tong Jia worked with his bronze-colored muscles on his upper body. He kept giving instructions at the side and ended up exhausting himself. Looking at the weird thing that Renbochin was making, Caretaker Sher came over and asked, "Brother Ren, what are you making?" Renbochin was startled by the loud voice. He raised his head and saw that it was indeed Caretaker Sher. His voice was definitely gifted and it was at the maximum level. "Wait a minute, I will show you something fun later." After hearing what Renbochin said, Caretaker Sher smiled and waited at the side to see what Renbochin was going to make. "You, Tinghulu, go and get some ice from the ice house." "Tai Dao, go and get a bucket of water," Renbochin shouted. After a while, the 2 of them returned. Renbochin grabbed a handful of crushed ice and placed it in the box. Then, he filled the box with water. The ice water started to drip down along the cloth. Renbochin estimated that it was about time. He pulled Caretaker Sher to the front of the box and made it face the grid. "Wait here, I will start soon." He instructed Tai Dao to place a stool under the box and increase the height of the stool. He then stood beside the box, held the rope that was used to pull the fan, and pulled it up. Chapter 45. What's this? Caretaker Sher's eyes widened in surprise. "Air cooler," Renbochin said. He pulled the rope a few more times and shouted, "Hulu, come and pull the rope." Then, he ran to the air cooler to enjoy the cool breeze. Tinghulu imitated Renbochin and pulled the rope before releasing it. The cool breeze immediately blew on Renbochin's body, making him feel very comfortable. It was so comfortable to enjoy an air cooler in this world. Tong Jia also ran to Renbochin's side. He wanted to try out the thing that he had been busy making for the whole afternoon. He squeezed slightly on Renbochin's body and almost made him tumble. After Renbochin stabilized himself, he glared at him. Tong Jia gave him a simple and honest smile. Renbochin was so angry that he wanted to kick him. However, the cool breeze on such a hot day was too comfortable. He opened his arms and closed his eyes in satisfaction. Unfortunately, he did not enjoy it for long before the cool breeze disappeared. When he opened his eyes, Caretaker Sher was squatting in front of the box, trying to figure out how the cold breeze came out. The cold breeze blew on his face. How could it still reach Renbochin, who was behind him? How can this thing blow out wind? Caretaker Sher asked as he looked into the box. Renbochin thought about how to explain. After some thought, he simply said, "You won't understand even if I tell you. What do you think will happen if we sell this thing?" Renbochin squatted beside Caretaker Sher and laughed. "It should be possible to sell it, right? But it's a little troublesome. Someone needs to pull the rope, right?" Caretaker Sher said with uncertainty. "It's not should, it's definitely," Renbochin said with certainty. Caretaker Sher's business sense was too bad. However, this was normal. Most people in Dayo were like this. Do you remember that I mentioned selling ice? This thing is more effective than putting ice in the house. It cools down faster, Renbochin said. It's such a good thing, it's better to send it to Her Majesty, Caretaker Sher said after some thought. It's a little too crude. Renbochin naturally knew that he had to send one to the Empress first, but the one in front of him was really not presentable. Indeed, the box on the outside was made of wood that had just been sawed open. Although the woodworking skills of this world were quite good, and they were all connected with mortise and tenon joints, which would definitely attract a lot of rich people back on Earth, it still couldn't hide the crudeness of the box. In the modern world, everyone knew that the packaging had to be beautiful, classy. An item worth 100 renminbi had to be packaged with 100 renminbi to make it look like it was worth 1,000 renminbi. Although the main function of the air conditioner was the function of the air conditioner, if Renbochin had a choice, he would rather have a $100 air conditioner with a $200 package. Can it create complex patterns? Renbochin turned his head and asked Tong Jia. I don't know. It depends on what it looks like. Tong Jia rubbed the back of his head and answered honestly. Let me think about what pattern to make, Renbochin said. Now that it was so simple and crude, there was no point in gifting it to the Empress. No matter what, it had to be done beautifully. Even if she was the Empress, a woman's nature wouldn't change, right? What is the nature of women? Glittering gold. Like the dragons. You can't move when you see shiny things. This was the first thought that crossed Renbochin's mind. Soon after, he shook his head. After all, this was the Empress. No matter how poor Dayo was, the Empress wouldn't lack gold and gemstones. Furthermore, Dayo had a lot of gemstones. It was just that most of them were deep in the mountains and were difficult to excavate. Most of them were picked up in the open. In that case, what else could a woman like? Cute. If it was an ordinary woman, it might be possible. When he thought about how the Empress sent the polar bear flying with a slap, Renbochin felt that it was impossible. After thinking for a while, Renbochin couldn't figure out anything. He shook his head and decided not to think about this matter for now. He found a chef to cook a small meal for them. After that, Renbochin returned to the house. There was no entertainment at night in this world. Other than making babies after dark, other than sleeping, Renbochin was still not used to this kind of schedule. Since he couldn't fall asleep, he sat at the door and teased Gun Gun and Tian Tian. The two little chaps were originally lying on their backs on the ground. After he woke them up, they climbed onto his body. As a result, the two little chaps stopped moving when they climbed onto his knees. After taking a closer look, he realized that they had actually fallen asleep. Renbochin had no choice but to look up at the starry sky. The starry sky in this world was still very beautiful. When he looked up, he could see countless stars. Among them, there were 2 starlight rivers and a huge disk. He wasn't sure if it was a nebula. This kind of starry sky was magnificent and he was momentarily dazed. While looking at it, Renbochin suddenly thought of an idea. If he were to take a picture of this starry sky and post it on the internet, would those netizens and astronomers go crazy? It was a pity that he didn't bring his cell phone. Another idea immediately popped up in his mind. If he were to put this starry sky on a box, it would definitely be magnificent. After thinking of this idea, he immediately couldn't sit still. He looked down and saw that the 2 little chaps were actually drooling all over him. He quickly put them down and ran to look for Tong Jia. He thought that Tong Jia had already fallen asleep. He didn't expect him to be smiling foolishly at the air cooler and pulling the rope with his hand. "Come out, I have an idea." Renbochin went forward and pulled Tong Jia's arm, wanting to pull him up. In the end, he couldn't move him even after using all his strength. "Ah!" Tong Jia turned his head and looked at Renbochin with a silly smile. Renbochin looked at that silly smile, clenched his teeth, and kicked Tong Jia's leg. "Get up and come out with me." Tong Jia then got up and asked, "Caretaker Ren, what's wrong? Come out first." Renbochin called Tong Jia out of the house, pointed to the starry sky above his head, and asked, "Can you put this starry sky on the box?" "How?" Tong Jia was at a loss. "Just carve it, I will think of a way to do the rest," Renbochin said. "Oh, it should be possible. I see these stars every day, I am very familiar with them," Tong Jia said with a simple and honest face. "That's it then. Tomorrow, carve this starry sky on the box, especially these 2 galaxies and that circle. You must not burn them. Also, carve some stars that you are more familiar with." "Okay, I can do this," Tong Jia immediately said. "Is 1 day enough?" "Yes, it won't even take 1 day." "Alright, you should settle this matter tomorrow." "Do I need to draw it first?" Renbochin asked. "No need, it's all in my head." Renbochin didn't say anything else after hearing what Tong Jia said. He hummed a tune and went back to his house to sleep. The next morning, Renbochin went to look for Tong Jia with a biscuit in his mouth. He sat beside Tong Jia and watched him dismantle the box and carve the starry sky on a few surfaces. Renbochin took out the air cooler and placed it on his knees. He pulled the rope from time to time. In the afternoon, Tong Jia raised his head and shouted, "Caretaker Ren, it's done." Chapter 46. There were dye and sumac sap in the Beast Park. After all, the Beast Park belonged to the royal family. The things they used were much better than the commoners. The box had a total of 6 sides. The bottom side was completely flat. The other 5 boards were facing upwards. Wood shavings were sprinkled on them. After pressing them down a few times, the wood shavings were swept away. This way, the holes in the box were basically filled with wood shavings. Then, a black and blue dye made from an unknown fruit was mixed with the sumac sap. After that, the few boards turned dark blue. After finishing, Renbochin put the boards aside. He looked at the sky and estimated that it was almost time to eat. He went to the kitchen to eat. There was a big courtyard outside the kitchen. At this moment, there were more than 10 tables. This was the time when the entire Beast Park was the most crowded. Regardless of gender, everyone was gathered here. There were even naked children wrestling there. The adults were happily watching from a distance and didn't care. Renbachien saw a 6 or 7-year-old child being thrown to the ground with a piece of skin on his knee. He didn't care at all. He stood up and started screaming. Each of them bared their fangs and brandished their claws like a crab. Children who grew up in such an environment were used to it. Caretaker Ren, sit here. Someone stood up and shouted. Renbachien looked and saw Tai Dao. Although he had stayed in the Beast Park for some time, he didn't have many opportunities to eat with the others. Including today, it was only the second time. Usually, he was busy with something or was in the palace. He would only go to the kitchen when it was dark. Renbachien sat with Tai Dao and the others. He and his 10 subordinates formed a table. When the dishes were served, he took a look. There was roasted lamb leg, roasted lamb ribs, boiled beef, a pot of wild vegetable soup, and a plate of stir-fried eggs with vegetables. When the dishes were served, everyone ignored Renbachien. In the blink of an eye, the plate of stir-fried eggs with vegetables was gone. Each of them had a bowl of wild vegetable soup and were eating the lamb ribs. Renbachien blinked his eyes and was speechless. All he saw was a bunch of dirty hands sweeping past, and then there was nothing left. In Dayo, meat was cheap and vegetables were expensive. Almost every meal was meat. 2 dishes of vegetables were gone in the blink of an eye. Furthermore, this group of people didn't have the habit of using chopsticks. Chopsticks came from Great Xia. Usually, only rich people and officials would use them. Renbachien slurped the wild vegetable soup, nibbled on a piece of lamb chop, and ate some of the dry rations here. This type of dry food was a type of coarse grain. It was coarse, a little harsh on the throat, and a little sour. However, none of them despised it. There were also refined rice and noodles, but only the rich could afford them. It was already good enough that the people in the Beast Park could eat this. It was said that the people in the mountain stockade ate meat for every meal, and their supplementary food consisted of berries and wild vegetables. On Earth, eating meat was considered good food, but here, it was the most basic diet. If you were to trade a caddy of wild vegetables for a few caddies of meat, there would be plenty of people willing to trade with you. Fortunately, Dayo still had another product, which was tea leaves. There were many wild tea trees on the mountain. As a result, the people of Dayo didn't have to fight over a brick of tea like the people of the grassland. After finishing his meal, he returned to Tong Jia's place. Seeing that the dye on the wood was almost dry, he placed the panel upside down on the ground and used a hammer to knock on the back twice. When he picked it up again, most of the chips had fallen off, revealing holes in the wood. Renbachien was delighted when he saw the first wooden plank. Although it hadn't met his requirements, the first step had already met his expectations. Following which, he did the same for the other planks and placed them together. Renbachien was stunned. The dark blue plank was filled with light-colored stars. The 2 Milky Way and the nebula were embellished on it. It really looked like the starry sky he saw last night. Subconsciously, he looked up at the sky. At this moment, the sky had just turned dark, and there were only a few stars. They were sparse and looked like pockmarks scattered on the sky. It was far from the magnificent sight he saw last night. He lowered his head and continued to look at the plank. The only problem was that the dye on the plank wasn't evenly applied. However, this was a small problem, and it would be fine after 2 more brushes. Thinking of this, Renbachien picked up the seasoning beside him and brushed another layer on the plank. This time, he didn't have to worry about the seasoning getting into the holes. He just needed to take a look and make sure that there was no problem. Caretaker Ren, is this okay? Tong Jia came to Renbachien's side and asked. Renbachien searched his chest pocket. He originally wanted to find a piece of silver as this craftsmanship deserved a reward. He couldn't just let the horse work and not feed it. However, he didn't have anything on him. Usually, when he didn't go out, he was too lazy to carry silver in his chest pocket. Beautifully done. Ranbochin gave a thumbs up. Leave it here first, I will come back tomorrow. Ranbochin patted Tong Jia's shoulder, which was half a head taller and half a head thicker than him. All right. Do I need to put it on? No need, this will do. Wait for the color to dry and put it in the house. Take it out tomorrow morning and brush it again. After Ranbochin finished speaking, he strolled back with his hands behind his back. Tian was sprawled out and sleeping outside the door. Gungun's but was on the stone slab that was more than 10 centimeters high. Its head was on the ground, and it was lying upside down. Ranbochin walked closer and could even hear light snoring sounds. The two little guys' bellies rose and fell, so he touched them. The two little guys grunted in dissatisfaction and turned over to continue sleeping. The next morning, he put a few ingots of silver into his chest pocket and pulled Tai Dao and Tinghulu out with a few planks. He was going to melt the silver and drip it into the holes on the planks that were arranged according to the position of the starry sky. The dark blue background was dotted with silver stars. It must be extremely beautiful. When they reached Tongjia, Ranbochin took out a piece of silver that was worth about 1 tael and handed it to him. Take it, this is for you. How can I ask for money to work for caretaker Ren? I have a monthly salary. Tongjia waved his hands. This is for you, don't talk nonsense. Ranbochin immediately threw the piece of silver to him in a parabola. Tongjia hurriedly caught it. Thank you, caretaker Ren. Tongjia held the silver and smiled. This piece of silver was equivalent to his monthly salary for more than half a month. Okay. Ranbochin nodded his head and looked at the planks carefully. The dye on them had just dried, and after 3 rounds of coloring, they looked much more beautiful. Although some parts were deep and some were shallow due to the different grain of the wood, it already looked rather beautiful. He shouted for Tai Dao and Tinghulu, who were behind him, to carry 2 or 3 planks each and follow behind him. Halfway through, Ranbochin took out the few pieces of silver from his chest pocket and stuffed them into his waist pocket. Silver was really heavy when one carried too much of it. It was really uncomfortable to keep it in one's chest pocket. When they arrived at Baishur district, it was still the blacksmith shop from before. Shopkeeper, melt this piece of silver and pour it into the holes on the planks. You must make it flat, Ranbochin shouted as he took out a piece of silver and tossed it in his hand. The shopkeeper came over and looked at it carefully. Then, he looked at the piece of silver in Ranbochin's hand and said concisely, "It's not enough, you need another piece." Ranbochin threw another piece over and the shopkeeper nodded his head, "All right, come back in 4 hours to collect it." Ranbochin led the two of them to Jingyang Road to check on the shop. In the end, not long after they turned into Jingyang Road, they heard the angry voice of a woman coming from a shop by the roadside. "We spent a lot of effort to make this piece of skin. This is the white skin of a sharp-toothed tiger, and there are no scars at all. Yet, it can only be exchanged for half a bucket of salt." When Ranbochin heard this voice, he immediately turned around and saw 2 familiar figures in the shop. One of them was the woman named Na Gu and the other should be her brother. He did not expect to see the 2 of them again after only a few days. They were holding a roll of skin in their hands. Among the rolls of skin, one of the white skin was opened and displayed by the 2 of them. Chapter 47. A do was a unit of measurement. A do was about 6 caddies. Half a do was about 3 caddies, which was about 3 taels of silver. 1 tael of salt per caddy was equivalent to an ordinary person's monthly income. This price was indeed expensive. He remembered some nutritionists on Earth said that an ordinary person should consume 5 grams of salt a day. That was 3 taels of salt a month. A family of 3 would consume about 1 caddy of salt a month. This was very cheap for people on Earth, but it was extremely expensive for people in Deo. Even the chefs in the Beast Park use less salt in their food. In Deo, meat was a main dish and also a staple food. On one hand, salt was expensive. On the other hand, it was inedible if it was too salty. From the food that Rinpoche ate in the Beast Park, people in Deo ate at most half of the amount of salt that people on Earth ate. It could be seen that people in Deo were very frugal with salt. An ordinary family in Deo could barely afford to eat half a caddy of salt a month for a family of 3. Even so, salt was indeed a huge burden. It wasn't the first time that something like this happened in the shop, and it wouldn't be the last. People had to eat salt, but Deo didn't produce salt. They could only be at the mercy of these merchants. Similarly, people in Deo didn't know how to tan fur. If the fur wasn't sold, it would rot in a short period of time. With these factors added together, the foreign merchants in Deo seemed to have formed a tacit understanding. Whether it was the price of fur or the price of salt, they were almost the same. This way, they could obtain the biggest profit. Rinpoche stood at the entrance of the shop and looked at the dispute inside. He shook his head slightly. This was the consequence of a country lacking in resources and technology. "Let's go," Rinpoche said. He brought Tinghulu and Tai Dao to the entrance of the shop. There was nothing much to see inside, so they turned to the Qin family's shop. Chen Zixing had been anxiously waiting for Rinpoche for the past few days. He couldn't understand a single word of the 3 books in his hands. This made him extremely anxious. After seeing Rinpoche, his eyes lit up. "Mr. Ren, you are finally here. I have been waiting for you these few days. I promised you that I would definitely translate for you." Rinpoche laughed. After Chen Zixing finished treating the patient, he asked his disciple to take his place. He pulled Rinpoche into the inner room and carefully took out 3 books from a box. Rinpoche picked up various treatises on typhoid and diseases, and asked Chen Zixing to prepare a pen and paper to record the contents. Following Rinpoche's reading, Chen Zixing's hand moved quickly on the paper like a chicken's claws. It was so fast that it looked like an illusion. Rinpoche couldn't help but admire the speed at which he wrote. Looking at his handwriting, he was even more impressed. He reckoned that even a cryptographer wouldn't be able to crack it. After reading for less than 2 hours, Rinpoche felt hungry. However, it wasn't easy to come here. Seeing that Chen Zixing had no intention of resting, Rinpoche gulped down water with all his might. "If you're hungry, drink more water to fill your stomach." After reading for 3 hours, Chen Zixing's eyes were wide open and his body was drenched in sweat. Rinpoche had no choice but to stop. If copying this thing tired him out, it would be a great sin. When Rinpoche stopped, Chen Zixing immediately threw away his pen. His hand was trembling like a chicken's claws. "I'm so tired," Chen Zixing shouted loudly. He grabbed a jar of water and poured it into his mouth. After Chen Zixing finished drinking the water, his right hand was still trembling. He didn't forget to raise his head and ask Su Wen, "How much have you written?" "About 8 more times." Rinpoche looked at the thickness of the book and said. Chen Zixing clenched his teeth and shook his hand. "I'll get my disciple to come in and write." "Forget it, I still have something to do. I'll come back another day," Rinpoche said. When Chen Zixing heard this, it was as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. He heaved a sigh of relief. All right. It seemed like he was really exhausted after reading for more than 2 hours just now. Rinpoche reckoned that if he had to write continuously for more than 2 hours, which was equivalent to 3 hours, he would probably tremble even more than Chen Zixing. He brought Tinghulu and Tai Dao, who had long fallen asleep on the bed, to the blacksmith shop. Just as they walked out of the medicine shop, they heard an indignant voice from the side. Our animal hides were only exchanged for 1.5 bushels of salt. The stronghold can't even last a few days. We might as well rob that shop tonight. When Renbochin heard this voice, he was elated. They were really fated to meet again. He turned his head and saw Na Gu and a burly man standing at one side. Na Gu's face was pale and her mouth was hanging so much that one could hang a soy sauce bottle. Don't talk nonsense. You should go back and see if you can hunt for more prey these few days. The burly man was carrying a bag and lecturing her. The bag should be filled with the salt that the two of them exchanged for. It's a pity that we can't eat the salt water in the mountains. Otherwise, we wouldn't need to buy salt from them. How is that salt water? That is poisonous water. Even animals don't eat it. In the past, some people have eaten it. Although it has a salty taste, they would get goosebumps and vomit after eating it. Some people would even faint and die. If we want to eat that, we might as well rob their shop at night. The burly man snorted coldly. Renbochin was about to walk past the two of them. When he heard this, he was startled and immediately stopped. Both of you. Renbochin turned around and cupped his hands. Who are you? The burly man looked over with a fierce look. Ah, you are that. Na Gu recognized Renbochin. I heard both of you talking about salt water just now. May I know what it is like? Renbochin inquired. When the burly man heard his question, he snorted coldly and ignored him. He had just suffered a bellyful of anger from those few shops and had no place to vent it. I am not from the Yun nation, nor am I from the Qin nation. I am also not from Great Xia. I am currently working in the Beast Park. The matters between the two of you and those merchants have nothing to do with me. Logically speaking, I should be considered a Dayo citizen now. Renbochin looked at the attitude of the two of them. He didn't need to think to know the whole story. This is caretaker Ren of the Beast Park, Tai Dao interrupted from behind. The Beast Park was attached to the palace. When the two of them heard that Renbochin was working in the Beast Park, their expressions became better. They turned around and sized up Renbochin. Why are you asking about salt water? Someone has already thought of a way to make it edible. Even the wild beasts in the mountains don't eat it. If it's poisonous, it really can't be eaten. However, perhaps we can refine it to remove the poison. Then, you won't have to worry about eating salt anymore, Renbochin said. Impossible, the burly man said resolutely. Don't bother. Someone has already thought of that, Na Gu said. Her attitude towards Renbochin was much better than the burly man. Perhaps it was because she had bumped into Renbochin before, so she didn't feel so unfamiliar with him. Can I know after listening to both of you talk about the salt water first? Renbochin asked. That water comes from a pool on the mountain. The water is salty, bitter and smelly. We call it the Black Pool, Na Gu said. The water is black. Is it the smell of rotten eggs? Renbochin quickly asked. Chapter 48. After hearing Na Gu's words, Renbochin was more certain. When he heard about the poisonous brine, he already had an idea. Although it was poisonous, everything in the world was made up of ions and molecules. Under certain conditions, there would definitely be a chemical reaction. This meant that the salt could be extracted or the toxicity could be eliminated. The black water was also emitting the smell of rotten eggs. It was very likely to be a kind of black brine. This kind of thing existed on Earth, and it had been refined and used by the ancient people using the crystallization of wisdom nearly 2,000 years ago. This was the predecessor of the famous well salt. After understanding the situation in this world, Renbochin specially researched all kinds of information about well salt. In fact, it wasn't just the sea that produced salt. People in Sichuan, Tibet, and other places used various methods to extract salt from nature, which was a necessity for daily life. There were also various methods. Sunning salt from natural brine on the surface and salt crystallization from saline alkali land were the simplest. Without these conditions, there were many other methods to produce salt. Well salt was one of them. Among them were black brine wells, yellow brine wells, and stone wells. They mainly extracted seawater that accumulated underground after the evolution of the Earth's crust. Or in other words, metamorphosed seawater. The black brine well referred to the poisonous black brine. This metamorphosed seawater was usually 300 meters underground. However, due to earthquakes or other reasons, it would occasionally form springs or pools. It was precisely because of this that Rinpoche immediately thought of this when he heard them mention the poisonous brine. Do you have that brown brine there? It's also salty and poisonous, Rinpoche immediately asked. The reason why he asked this was because black brine contained a large amount of sulfate and yellow brine contained barium. Both types of brine were poisonous to the human body. However, if they were mixed together in a suitable ratio, the sulfate and barium could be converted into barium sulfate crystals. This would eliminate the toxicity and allow the extraction of well salt. Of course, the premise was that the black pool was indeed black brine. Furthermore, there were no other poisonous ingredients in it. According to the short description just now, Rinpoche felt that the first possibility was very high. As for the second possibility, it was hard to say. No. The burly man replied coldly. Even though he knew that Rinpoche worked in the beast park, it only made him less hostile. It didn't mean that he would treat Rinpoche kindly. In fact, Rinpoche's thin and weak body looked similar to the people of the Yun Nation and Great Xia. He didn't like people like him. This had already penetrated deep into his bones. Yes. Nagu suddenly thought of something and turned around to refute the burly man. The last time we met in the mountains, the gong was so thirsty that he drank a mouthful of water. After that, he didn't have any energy for the entire afternoon and shot an arrow straight at the toothed beast's face. You were almost pierced through by the beast. Wasn't that water what he said? Humph, the man snorted coldly and turned his head away. Nagu turned to look at Rinpoche and said, "There's a crevice in the mountain. The water there is exactly like what you said, but it's a little brown and can't be drunk." Rinpoche was delighted to hear this. He was just asking in passing. He didn't expect that there would really be one. "May I know where your village is?" Rinpoche asked. "What are you doing?" Nagu immediately became vigilant. "I don't know where your village is. Where can I find the black water pool and the other water?" Rinpoche asked. "Why are you looking for this thing? Do you think you can use it as salt?" "I already told you that it's poisonous." Nagu looked at him suspiciously. "Since it's poisonous, there must be a way to detoxify it. Everything in this world reinforces and counteracts each other." "Humph, I don't believe you," Nagu said straightforwardly. "You have to try to find out. If you really want to look for it, I can hire you as a guide and use salt as revenge. How about that?" Rinpoche tried to tempt her. Nagu rolled her eyes and stuck out a finger. "I'm a good hunter. If you want to hire me as a guide, you will need at least half a caddy of salt a day." Rinpoche looked at her outstretched finger and thought about what she said. He was very curious. If she wanted half a caddy of salt, what would she do? Stick out 2 fingers. At the thought of this, Rinpoche subconsciously stuck out 2 fingers and asked, "How many is this?" Nagu was stunned at first. Then, she flew into a rage and asked, "Do you think I'm a fool?" She immediately flashed her fists, which were 1 size bigger than those of the women on earth. She didn't forget to bare her teeth at Rinpoche like an enraged cat. Renbochin estimated the strength of the Dayo people and looked at Nagu's fists. He estimated that if he was hit in the chest by such a small fist, he would probably vomit his liver out. Half a caddy of salt, I agree. Renbochin immediately changed his words. Ha! Well, if you have a good hunter like me as your guide, you will benefit greatly. Nagu retracted her fist, raised her head, and proudly said with her chest puffed out. Are you really from the Beast Park? Nagu thought for a while and asked again. Renbochin took out a sign from his pocket and said, Look at it yourself. I don't recognize it. I don't understand it. Nagu spread out her hands. I told you long ago that this is Caretaker Ren from the Beast Park. Do you think he would impersonate you to deceive you? Tai Dao said. Or would he be satisfied by making some items from Earth and earning some money? If he was in a world similar to ancient China, he might really do that. There was nothing wrong with being carefree. However, there were too many unknowns in this world. Without a high status, he wouldn't be able to understand too much. For example, he hadn't seen the Kirin until now. It was said that there was someone in the palace in charge of it. Chapter 49. When he arrived at the blacksmith shop, Renbochin saw a few blue wooden boards placed at the side. They were like the night sky. Countless silver dots formed a river that spanned across it. When he took a few steps forward, the melted silver dots reflected the light, giving him the illusion that he was looking at the galaxy at night. It's done, take it away. The remaining silver from your wages is enough, the shop owner said without raising his head. Renbochin felt that this creation was magnificent, but the shop owner did not seem to feel anything. Due to the low technical content, he was not willing to take a second look. When Renbochin walked closer, he felt that it was much more beautiful from afar than up close. However, he was already satisfied with this. It was enough for him to reach this level. After looking at the front of the 5 wooden boards, there was nothing to nitpick about. Tai Dao and Tinghulu carried the boxes back to the Beast Park. They first went to Tong Jia's place to assemble the air cooler and placed it outside the house. Renbochin crossed his arms and looked at it from all angles. The effect didn't seem to be as good as before. It seemed that it was too bright. Under the direct sunlight, even though the silver dots were sparkling, some of the flaws in the box were magnified. Why was the effect so good in the blacksmith shop just now? Naturally, it was because of the lack of light. Renbochin was well aware that it was easier to conceal the flaws of an item in a dark place. For example, when he looked at himself in the mirror in the bathroom, he always felt that he was already handsome to a certain extent. However, when he looked at himself in the mirror under the sun, he immediately felt that it wasn't his own face. This was a tragic story. However, with such an experience, he immediately moved the air cooler back into the house. It was indeed more pleasing to the eye now. Especially after he closed the door and lit 2 oil lamps, Renbochin immediately felt that this air cooler was already a fighter among air coolers. Does it look good? Renbochin crossed his arms with a satisfied look and asked Tong Jia without turning his head. Caretaker Ren, if you say it looks good, then it looks good, Tong Jia replied honestly. Renbochin glanced at him. Who said that this fellow was simple and honest? He asked someone to move the air cooler back to his house. Renbochin originally thought that the Empress would summon him to the palace today and he would be able to directly present the air cooler to her. However, no one came to the palace until nightfall. Renbochin went to the kitchen and found half a leg of lamb. He cut it into slices, returned it to the wok, and stir-fried it. He returned to his room and slept. When he woke up, he was back in the real world. Nothing much had happened in the past 3 days. He had nothing better to do, but he had been drinking beer for 3 days straight. In addition, he had gone out to buy a few things over the past 2 days. One was an e-book device that stored information on salt wells, the development of smelting, and the development of agricultural tools. Another was a few novels, including Journey to the West, Three Kingdoms, Investiture of the Gods, and a few web novels. These could be used to pass the time. If the Empress wanted to listen to stories, he wasn't afraid of forgetting the content. This thing could be used for about 20 days on a full charge, which should be enough. The other item was an essential self-defense item that Rinpoche had forgotten on his previous 2 trips back, an electric baton. It was slightly bigger than a palm and looked similar to a flashlight. It was said that it could discharge electricity for 20 minutes before it lit up. Normally, it would only take a few seconds to a dozen seconds, and it could be used about 100 times. As for electric current and voltage, he did not know much about it. As for its power, the boss mysteriously told him that even a strong and burly man would faint after being poked by it. Rinpoche reckoned that with the physique of a Dayo person, a few seconds would definitely not be enough. Even if it couldn't knock out the other party, it could still numb the other party's body and make them unable to move. Otherwise, if he encountered any trouble outside, he would not even have a means of self-defense. With his physique and strength, even if a few of them were tied together, they wouldn't be able to withstand a single pinch. Having an electric baton would at least be safer. If he encountered any trouble, he could just poke him with the electric baton. I don't believe that you guys aren't afraid of electricity. Hopefully, this electric baton would be as effective as what the boss said. He definitely wouldn't dare to poke himself as he was afraid of pain. Tong Jia, that silly fellow, looked like he had thick skin and flesh. Let's go back and try poking him. If it didn't work, he would come back and settle the score with the boss. Lastly, there was the camera. Rinpoche really wanted to take pictures of the things in this world, such as Tian Tian and Gun Gun. If he were to go back and post them on the internet, it would definitely be very popular. After all, while those scientists were still guessing whether there were extraterrestrial life forms, he had already arrived in a world that was different from Earth. Unfortunately, he couldn't tell anyone about this. He remembered someone saying that not returning home after becoming rich was like walking at night in brocade clothes. Now, it wasn't just a matter of being rich anymore. He was the only one in the entire world. Unfortunately, he couldn't tell anyone about this. He didn't even dare to tell an anonymous story on the internet. He could only use this method to share his feelings of wanting to show off with others. After charging the electric baton, Rinpoche put the electric baton and the e-book in a pocket and returned to that world while asleep. After waking up, Rinpoche took out the camera from the bag and went out. Sure enough, he saw Yuan Yuan and Gun Gun lying on their backs. Before he raised these 2 little chaps, Rinpoche had always thought that animals slept on their backs. In the end, after raising them, he realized that these 2 chaps didn't have any sleeping postures and didn't forget to act cute while sleeping. Well, he took 2 close-up shots and then zoomed out to take pictures from all angles. The 2 little chaps then shook their heads and crawled over to hug his calves while humming non-stop. From top to bottom, Rinpoche took a few more pictures of the panda hugging his thighs before hanging the camera around his neck. He teased the 2 chaps for a while before going to fetch them water and prepare breakfast. After eating breakfast, Rinpoche put the electric baton on his waist and strolled to look for Tong Jia. Tong Jia was leaning against the wall and picking his teeth with his fingers. He had a signature silly smile on his face. Rinpoche didn't know why he was so happy every day. Tong Jia! Rinpoche shouted. Hey, caretaker Ren. Tong Jia jogged all the way over and didn't forget to shake his fingers. Rinpoche saw a small black dot being flung to the ground by him. Tong Jia, I have something to discuss with you. Caretaker Ren, just say it. Tong Jia said repeatedly. Caretaker Ren was very generous and rewarded him with 1 tael of silver for a day's work. Tong Jia wasn't smart, but he wasn't stupid either. Of course, he knew that Caretaker Ren was powerful and that he had to hug him tightly. I'll poke you with this as a test. Is it okay? Renbochin took out the electric baton that looked like a flashlight from his waist and smiled kindly. What's this? It's okay. Caretaker Ren, you can poke me. Tong Jiao looked at the gadget in Renbochin's hand. It looked like a stick and didn't even have a sharp point. How powerful could it be? He immediately said generously. Chapter 50. After a long time, Tong Jia got up from the ground and looked at the little thing in Renbochin's hand with fear. He took 3 big steps back as if he had seen a ghost. Renbochin looked at Tong Jia's expression and felt a little embarrassed. He smiled kindly, but Tong Jia hid further away when he saw his smile. However, Dayo people's resistance to electric shocks was average. They were only slightly stronger than the burly men on Earth. It seemed like the boss was not lying when he said that a burly man could be knocked unconscious. Although Tong Jia did not faint, he trembled for a long time and fell to the ground. He only recovered after a long time. How do you feel? Renbochin asked Tong Jia. Numb, can't exert any strength, feel nauseous, and a little painful. What is that? Tong Jia hid far away from Renbochin and even retched to the side. Well, it was similar to how Earthlings felt after being electrocuted. Renbochin waved his hand at Tong Jia, stuffed the electric baton at his waist, and strolled to the field. From afar, he saw a few people sitting at the edge of the field and chatting. When they saw Renbochin, they patted their butts and greeted, Caretaker Ren. I'm just here to take a look. Renbochin scanned the field with his eyes as he spoke. He could tell that the field had just been watered. Remember to water it regularly, or else the sun is too strong. After a week, the new sprouts will be able to withstand the sun, Renbochin exhorted. Caretaker Ren, don't worry, we will remember this, the few odd job workers replied. After Renbochin confirmed it, he relaxed and sat at the entrance. Brother Ren, Caretaker Shi walked over from afar. The 2 shaved ice shops are opening for business today. Do you want to go and take a look? You are the one who suggested this business, but you have not been there until now. After listening to Caretaker Shi, Renbochin thought for a while. Since he had nothing to do, he might as well follow them. Renbochin grabbed the 2 little fellows by their necks and pulled them down from his legs. He got up and went back to his house to take some silver and followed Caretaker Shi out. The 2 shaved ice shops were located at Gujiazhai and Yuelu. The best location at Jingyang Avenue had not been fully installed yet. The 2 of them went to Gujiazhai first. This was the main residential area for the commoners and also the largest district in the city. The shop was located at the end of the street, and there were only a few people in front of the shop. It was a far cry from what Renbochin had expected. According to Renbochin's expectations, even if it wasn't crowded, there should at least be a large group of people. But what he saw now was a burly man sitting on a stool at the door with a towel draped over his shoulder. There was only one person standing behind the bar counter. There was no one else. Hey, Dad, why are you here? When the burly man sitting at the entrance saw Renbochin and Caretaker Shi walking over, he stood up from his stool and took 2 steps forward. The moment he opened his mouth, his voice traveled half a street away. The voices of this father and son were definitely passed down from generation to generation. Just by listening to this voice, Renbochin dared to say that this was definitely their biological son. Furthermore, the son had surpassed the father. In the future, if someone were to offend him, he would not have to do anything else. He could just ask Caretaker Shi and his son to sit beside him and chat. That person would probably break down in less than an hour. You brat, you are still talking. I brought someone over to see how you guys are doing, Caretaker Shi yelled at Renbochin. Renbochin's head buzzed. He immediately scuttled backward like a startled rabbit. He jumped 3 steps in a row before he felt that he was out of the range of the duo's sonic boom. Usually, when Caretaker Sure was the only one speaking, Renbochin would have to stretch his head further away. After some time, Caretaker Sure realized that he could still lower his voice. Of course, that was only relative to Renbochin. Now that both father and son were here, it was better for him to hide further away. Brother Ren, this is my son, Shi Qingshan. Caretaker Sure introduced his son while reaching out to place his hand on Renbochin's shoulder. When he turned his head again, Renbochin, who was just beside him, was now 2 meters behind him. Brother Ren, why are you lagging behind? Let me introduce you, this is my son. Caretaker Sure waved at Renbochin. Renbochin's feet seemed to have grown roots and he refused to move forward no matter what. He cupped his hands and said, "Hello, hello. Are you the caretaker Ren that my father mentioned? My father said that you are a smart person and know a lot of things." Shi Qingshan walked to Caretaker Shi's side and spoke to Renbochin. Half of the people on the street turned their heads to look at him. Renbochin was embarrassed. To be called smart in front of him, it seemed that he had not had the chance to do so since he graduated from primary school. Especially when half of the people on the street heard it, it was really too shameful. Pfft. Someone not far away immediately laughed. Caretaker Shi turned his head and looked over. It was a shop that was opened by the Yun Nation and specialized in selling daily necessities. The shop owner stood at the door and could not hide his smile. "Are you mocking my brother?" Caretaker Shi's words were full of malice. Even though he had been in Dayo for a long time, his fierce-looking face was still very intimidating to the shop owner. "Why would I?" I suddenly recalled something from the past. The shop owner laughed. "Forget it, let's talk inside." Renbochin walked forward with an awkward look on his face. Caretaker Shi glared at the shop owner before bringing his son into the shop. After the few of them entered, the shop owner sneered. "Smart people. There are many smart people in this world, especially when compared to you Dayo people. Everyone in the Yun Nation is smart." He looked at the shop beside him and pondered for a long time. Until now, he still did not know what this shop did. A restaurant was not a restaurant, and a shop was not a shop. Initially, he saw that there were many tables inside and thought that it was a restaurant. Only later did he realize that it was not a restaurant. Forget it, who cares about them? The shop had been open for a long time, but there was not a single person inside. No one knew what was sold inside. If they were to do business like this, it would close sooner or later. The weather was too hot, and it was better to stay indoors where it would be cooler. The shop owner could not be bothered with the shop next door. He turned around and went back to find a place to rest. After entering the shop, Renbochin sized it up. There were almost no changes in the shop. It was just tidied up, cleaner, and there were a few more tables and chairs. Not a single person in the morning. Caretaker Shi asked. "No." Shi Qingshan touched the back of his head. He had a simple and honest look on his face and lowered his voice. It seemed that they were used to speaking like that outside. When they returned to the house, they would subconsciously lower their voice. It was the same for ordinary people. Their voices were generally louder outside than inside. This was a kind of habit. One could only blame this father and son pair for being too loud. Renbochin walked one round in the house and frowned. Suddenly, he thought of a problem. Why did he not see the signboard on the shop when he came in just now? Where's the signboard? Renbochin stretched out his hand and pointed outside the door. The signboard above the door, it's not up yet, right? It was supposed to be delivered this morning, but old Lu drank too much last night. In the morning, he said that it was almost done. It will be delivered in the afternoon, Shan replied honestly. There was not even a signboard, and no one knew what this shop was for. It would be strange if someone could enter. Chapter 51. An hour later, there was an additional table at the entrance of the shaved ice shop. The person who previously stood behind the bar counter was called Shirshigu. This name sounded cultured, but he was still a burly man. He was from the same family as caretaker Shir. At this moment, he was cutting fruits at the entrance of the shop and scraping the ice. First, he scraped the ice off layer by layer. Then, he placed the fruit pulp inside and poured some fruit juice over it. Just like that, a bowl of fresh shaved ice was made. Meanwhile, Shan displayed his talent with his loud voice and shouted, "Shaved ice! Fruit shaved ice! Cool down and quench thirst! Come and try shaved ice on such a hot day!" Once he shouted, half the street could hear him. Renbachien held the freshly made shaved ice and slurped it, putting spoonfuls of it into his mouth. Eating shaved ice on such a hot day was indeed comfortable. After a while, caretaker Shir also held the freshly made shaved ice and sat beside Renbachien. A few pedestrians who were sweating profusely came over and stretched their heads over the table. "What's this?" "Fruit shaved ice. This is ice that can only be found in the north. Eating it on such a hot day will immediately relieve the heat and cool down from head to toe," Shan said. Those few people were tempted when they saw Renbachien and caretaker Shir holding the orange shaved ice drizzled with fruit juice. They asked, "How much is it?" 5 coins. "If it doesn't taste good, you can smash my stall." Shan gestured with his palm. "Give me one," a burly man immediately shouted. "All right, watermelon, orange, or green lotus. Which flavor do you want?" Shirshigu asked while scraping the ice. "Watermelon." The burly man looked at the watermelon shaved ice in Renbachien's hands. After a while, the shaved ice with fruit pulp drizzled with fruit juice was placed in his hands. The burly man sized it up. "Are those fine pieces of shaved ice?" After putting a spoonful of it into his mouth, the burly man's eyes widened. "So cold." "Not bad, not bad. Good stuff." The burly man took the lead and waved the spoon in his hand so fast that it almost left afterimages. Seeing him like this, the others also became interested. "Give me one. Give me one with orange." Not long after, there were 7 or 8 people around, all waiting for the shaved ice. This thing was made quickly, but it took a bit of effort to scrape the ice down. After a while, everyone had one. As for the burly man, he was already eating his second one with a satisfied look on his face. "Oh, there's poison." The burly man suddenly clutched his chest, and his expression changed. Hearing that it was poisoned, the others almost threw their bowls away. "Toxic your sister." Renbachien couldn't help but say, "Your stomach must have been irritated by eating so much cold food in such a short period of time." Everyone looked at the bowl in their hands, looked at Renbachien, and then looked at the burly man. There was complete silence. The burly man had a constipated expression on his face. His open vest revealed his pectoralis major, which was trembling. After a while, he recovered and looked at the bowl in his hand. "That scared me. I thought I was poisoned." Then, she looked at him in surprise and asked, "How did you know? Isn't this common knowledge in the north?" Renbachien rolled his eyes. Anyway, this was common knowledge on Earth. Eating a big mouthful of ice cream could easily irritate your stomach and cause stomach pain. Moreover, you were waving your spoon like a phantom, and you ate 2 bowls in a row. It would be strange if your stomach didn't hurt. Do you really think you're made of iron? Seeing that the burly man was fine, everyone was relieved. Someone asked Shan and simply went into the house to eat. The big man looked at the bowl in his hand. Shopkeeper, can I take it away? Bring your own bowl, Shi Qingshan said. Only then did the burly man put down his bowl and squeeze out of the crowd. Renbaqian and caretaker Shi watched from the side for a while. There were more and more people buying shaved ice. There were also some people sitting in the shop. Renbaqian and caretaker Shi finally felt at ease. They rejected caretaker Shi's idea of going to another shop to take a look and strolled back. This way, as long as the reputation of the shaved ice shop spread, there wouldn't be any problems. With Dayo's scorching hot weather, Renbaqian wouldn't believe that the shaved ice shop wasn't profitable. Qi Zishuan, I heard that you are the #1 expert in Dayo and one of the top 10 experts in the world. I, Long Wanli of Hanbei, am here to seek your guidance. Suddenly, a thunderous voice resounded through the air, causing the entire Jingyang Road to fall silent. Qi Zishuan, I heard that you are the #1 expert in Dayo and one of the top 10 experts in the world. Hanbei Long Wanli is here to seek guidance. After 3 consecutive voices, the entire Jingyang Avenue became noisy. Countless people came out of the shops on both sides of the street and looked in the direction of the voice. When Renbaqian heard this voice, he immediately became interested. Is this a challenge? Listening to this voice, it's 10 streets ahead of caretaker Shi and his son. He's definitely an expert. Let's go and see where it is. Renbaqian was excited. After being here for so many days, this was the first time he encountered such a situation. Even though there were daily fights in the city, where fists met flesh, and people were frequently kicked out, it wasn't as interesting as a duel between experts. It's the Imperial City. Caretaker Shi quickened his pace. Not only the 2 of them, but many other people also squeezed forward and directly brought the 2 of them into the crowd. Renbaqian, who was squeezing through the crowd, was slightly stunned when he heard caretaker Shi. Who's Qi Zishuan? It's Her Majesty, caretaker Shi said faintly. Only now did Renbaqian know the name of the Empress. Even though he heard that the Empress was the #1 expert in Dayo, he didn't know how to react just now. After all, the Empress didn't look old, and there were many civil and military officials in the imperial court. There were also experts who popped out of nowhere. Renbaqian had always thought that the so-called #1 expert in Dayo was an exaggeration. Looking at the current situation, that person was really the #1 expert? Originally, Renbaqian thought that he was here to challenge a general. He didn't expect it to be the Empress. Renbaqian couldn't help but say that this person came to the capital to challenge the Empress. This person won't be shot to death by thousands of arrows, right? Renbaqian asked subconsciously. That depends on Her Majesty's mood, caretaker Shi said uncertainly. Will Her Majesty really fight? Renbaqian asked curiously. Wouldn't it be a little too degrading for the Empress to personally fight and kill others? Furthermore, if there were any mishaps, it would be a big problem. As the saying goes, a gentleman doesn't stand under a collapsing wall. Even though there was no such saying in Dayo, the Empress in the throne room wouldn't fight and kill others, right? That depends on Her Majesty's mood, caretaker Shi repeated. Have you seen Her Majesty fight before? Renbaqian heard that the Empress seemed to have fought more than once. Of course, I have. Last year, there were more than 10 people who wanted to challenge Her Majesty. This year, there's only 1. Have they been beaten into submission? Renbaqian asked. Just now, that person said that the Empress was one of the top 10 experts in the world. It sounded impressive. They have all been beaten to death. Caretaker Shi sneered. Chapter 52. Just now, that person mentioned the top 10 experts. What's going on? Renbaqian asked another question. I heard that it was arranged by someone from Great Xia. Anyway, we don't care about this, caretaker Sure replied casually. They didn't care, but Rinpoche was very interested. Who arranged it? Which top 10 experts are they? Who else does Deo have? I don't know who did it, but someone did it, and then the news spread. I only knew about it because they would shout like that every time they came. Caretaker Sure sneered. It was obvious that he was very disdainful of these people's loud shouts that startled the entire city every time they came. However, Rinpoche felt that he was unhappy with the fact that the other party's voice was louder than his. It said that His Majesty is ranked 7th, and the general who supports the nation, Hong Wu, is ranked 9th. I'm not sure about the rest, but most of them are from Great Xia. There's one from the Yun nation and one from the Qin nation. Rinpoche was overwhelmed with emotions as he listened. Which youngster didn't dream of becoming an expert? He had also been that age. Although he felt that he could only dream of becoming a peerless master, he could still shout 666 from the side. Even so, Rinpoche was still very interested in the level of martial arts in this world. He didn't know if there was any mysterious qi or something like that. The two of them moved forward along with the crowd. When they passed by Beihong district, they could see that many of the mansions of the court officials on both sides of the street had their doors open. A few burly men were standing on stools, looking forward. He could already see the palace walls when he raised his head. However, there were too many people, so he couldn't see where the challenger was. Many people stopped outside the square in front of the palace. However, with a group of burly men standing in front of him, Rinpoche couldn't see anything. After jumping a few times, he finally saw a lone person standing in the square in front of the palace. Excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, Rinpoche said as he tried to squeeze his way forward. However, he was pushed back by someone's butt. Damn it! Rinpoche cursed. Just as Rinpoche was hesitating whether he should shout out, "You pooped in your pants," the row of soldiers standing on top of the palace wall neatly parted to both sides. Soon after, a lady dressed in red appeared. "Your Majesty!" "Yes, Your Majesty!" The surrounding people shouted one after another. Their voices gathered together and soared into the sky. It seemed like this Empress was quite loved and respected by the people. "It seems like Her Majesty is not in a good mood today," caretaker Sure said. "How do you know?" Rinpoche was curious. "If Her Majesty is in a good mood, she won't bother with people who come to challenge her," caretaker Sure said. Rinpoche pondered for a long time. Did this mean that the Empress would vent her anger on them when she was in a bad mood and ignore them when she was in a good mood? Rinpoche remembered caretaker Sure mentioning that all the challengers last year were beaten to death. None of them survived. In other words, none of them came with the Empress in a good mood. Was he too unlucky, or did the Empress have too many bad moods? It was understandable that she was in a bad mood for 2 or 3 days a month, but she couldn't be in a bad mood every day, right? At the thought of this, Rinpoche felt a chill on the back of his neck. Fortunately, he had not been executed the last few times he entered the palace. His luck was not bad. When the figure in front of the crowd saw the Empress appear at the top of the city wall, he immediately raised his voice and said, "Qi Zhixiao, although you are the ruler of a nation, you are also one of the top 10 experts in the world. I, Long Wanli, as a martial artist, have come to seek guidance from you. Please do not be stingy. Arrogant. How dare you shout the Empress's name?" Someone in the crowd immediately scolded. "How can you challenge the Empress whenever you want? You have to get past me first." A burly man strode out from the crowd with a huge saber in his hand. "Me too. Both of you are too weak, let me do it. Do you want to test the sharpness of my saber?" The burly man with the saber immediately glared back at him. He thought to himself that this sentence that he had just learned was indeed imposing. A few generals in the imperial court stepped forward one after another. After exchanging a few words, they started to undermine each other. Long Wanli was indifferent to the scolding and noise behind him. His gaze was fixed on the figure in red on top of the palace wall. At the same time, his aura was constantly rising. Before he came here, he had already challenged 19 experts and won all of them in one battle. His aura was at its sharpest. Some of the experts who were on his path of challenge avoided him one after another. Seeing this situation, he rode straight to the southwest and challenged one of the top 10 experts in the world when he was at his peak. He was also the one who was most likely to fight with him. As for the others, their whereabouts were uncertain, or they were in the midst of a large army. On the contrary, even though the Empress was an empress, she had fought many times. In order to prevent the other party from refusing to fight, she specially challenged him as a martial artist. At this moment, his fighting spirit was soaring and his aura was at its peak. Even those who were closer to him could feel the piercingly cold aura emitted from his body. It was as if he was an unparalleled sharp sword. With just one look, one could feel that his sharpness was unstoppable. Many people were affected by his aura and took a step back one after another. Even Renbochin could feel the sharpness coming from the front. It was as if a saber was right in front of him, giving him a fright. What is this? Aura, fighting spirit, sword intent, who knows what it's called? Caretaker Shi replied indifferently. Anyway, it's that thing. Renbochin composed himself. Even though he was in the crowd and the other party's back was facing him, he still felt that as long as the other party willed it, he could lose his life at any time. This feeling of being on the brink of death was really terrible. It was so terrible that he couldn't help but touch the stun button even though he knew that it was useless. The Empress, who was dressed in red, stood on top of the city gate tower and looked down. The corner of her mouth twitched slightly and she hooked her finger downwards. If it was somewhere else and such a woman hooked her finger at them, many people would definitely let their imaginations run wild. However, at this moment, everyone present could feel a domineering aura emanating from the Empress. She can't even be bothered to talk to you. Come, do it. Long Wanli's aura had already reached its peak. He was just waiting for the Empress's response. At this moment, the sword on his back was unsheathed with a clang sound and fell into his hand. His entire body transformed into a bolt of lightning and pierced towards the Empress. Everyone could feel his indomitable determination. Awesome, an otherworldly fairy. Renbochin could finally see clearly and was immediately amazed. He didn't know if it was the legendary man and sword become one, but at this moment, the feeling that Long Wanli gave him was that he and his sword had become one. His entire body was emitting an endless sword intent. And this sword really made him feel as if it had flown from the heavens. Even Renbochin was worried for the Empress on the palace wall. Although the Empress was indeed an expert, Renbochin usually felt that she was a little aloof and had a somewhat oppressive aura. He didn't feel the Empress's strength at all. Therefore, when he saw this sword that seemed to have come from the heavens, Renbochin couldn't help but feel a little worried. Facing this world-shocking sword, the Empress's expression didn't change at all. When the tip of the sword was directly in front of her, she stretched out her lily-white hand and lightly flicked it. Clang! A crisp sound was heard. The tip of the sword flew straight up into the sky. When the remaining half of the sword was also deflected, the lily-white hand directly imprinted on Long Wanli's chest. Immediately, he flew back at a speed faster than when he came. Just as Renbochin exclaimed in surprise, the other party flew back at a speed faster than when he left. Bang! Immediately, gravel flew everywhere and dust filled the air. After a long time, when the dust had settled, a large pit appeared on the stone-paved ground. Long Wanli was already dead, and all the bones in his body were broken. When the dust settled, the situation in the field was revealed. And the figure of the Empress on the palace wall had already disappeared. The crowd took a look and immediately dispersed with a hubbub. I thought he would be able to make one more move this time. I didn't expect him to die in one move. However, I finally got to see Her Majesty in action today. This guy is really too weak. I was looking forward to it for so long. Chapter 53. That's it. As soon as Rinpoche finished speaking, he felt someone fall to the side, almost pressing him to the ground. Caretaker Sure. What happened to you? Rinpoche held on to Caretaker Sure and asked in astonishment. Just now, Caretaker Sure was still fine, why did he suddenly become like this? Caretaker Sure's face trembled. He was speechless for a long time. You got a heart attack because you were too excited just now. Or cerebral infarction. Rinpoche was a little anxious. Caretaker Sure was a good person. He did not want to see anything happen to him. However, upon closer inspection, Caretaker Sure did not look like he was suffering from a heart attack or cerebral infarction. Caretaker Sure was also fine. He was just glaring at Rinpoche with his face twitching. Looking at him, it looked like he had been electrocuted. Rinpoche was shocked when he thought of this. He lowered his head and saw that the stun baton was in his hand. He had subconsciously taken it out after being shocked by that person's imposing manner. Don't tell me I pressed the button and poked Caretaker Sure's body when I was nervous. At the thought of this, he looked at Caretaker Sure's condition again. The more he looked, the more he felt that he had been electrocuted by Professor Yang. Rinpoche stuffed the stun baton back to his waist and hurriedly helped Caretaker Sure to sit at the side with an awkward expression on his face. After a long while, Caretaker Sure finally recovered. He looked at Rinpoche as if he had seen a ghost and asked, "What did you poke my thigh with just now?" "A slip of the hand, a slip of the hand." Rinpoche laughed dryly. Just now, he and Caretaker Sure were standing right next to each other. It was impossible for him to deny it even if he wanted to. What exactly is it? Caretaker Sure glared at Rinpoche. This. Rinpoche laughed dryly and waved the stun baton in front of Caretaker Sure. He did not expect Caretaker Sure to snatch it away. What is this? Just now, his whole body was numb and he couldn't move at all. I can't even exert any strength now. Caretaker Sure fiddled with the electric baton with a curious look on his face. Although the electric baton was made of plastic, in his eyes, it was already very well made. My secret treasure, the stun baton, Rinpoche blurted out. You have a master. Caretaker Sure was surprised. This is the first time I've heard you say that. Rinpoche didn't continue the conversation. He wouldn't be able to continue the conversation as it was originally a joke. How do I use this thing? Caretaker Sure continued to fiddle with the electric baton when he saw that Rinpoche did not answer him. Press the button. As soon as Rinpoche finished speaking, his entire body started trembling. Then, he directly fell to the ground. He finally knew what it felt like to be electrocuted. His entire body was numb and in pain. His stomach felt like it was on fire, and he felt nauseous. This feeling was indeed refreshing. In his heart, he wanted to cry but had no tears. Sure enough, as the saying goes, a jar will not break without leaving the well, and a general will not die without leaving the horse. He had only been carrying this electric baton for a day, and he was already in trouble. Caretaker Sure lifted Rinpoche's neck and placed him at his side. After playing with the electric baton for a while with a cheerful look on his face, he self-consciously tucked it into his waist. Brother Ren, I treat you well, right? I'll play with this thing and pass it to you in a few days, Caretaker Sure nagged beside Rinpoche. Rinpoche felt that he had encountered bandits. Caretaker Sure took about 5 minutes to recover from the electric shock, while Rinpoche took about 15 minutes to recover. Furthermore, Caretaker Sure only touched his body briefly before withdrawing the electric baton. When Renbochin could finally move, Caretaker Sure patted his butt and stood up. He had a carefree look on his face. He did not hold a grudge against Renbochin for poking him with the electric baton previously. Renbochin got up from the ground and moved his arms and legs. He looked at the electric baton at Caretaker Sure's waist and weighed the difference in size between him and Caretaker Sure. He decided to buy a few more as backup after he returned. At this moment, a group of soldiers in front of the plaza were filling the huge pit with soil. When Renbochin was placed at the side by Caretaker Sure, he could see the plaza. It seemed that no one had carried that person out. They actually buried him with soil. This made Renbochin feel rather horrified. This act of destroying the corpse and destroying the evidence was too open and aboveboard. However, looking at the momentum of that person flying upside down and crashing onto the ground, he reckoned that even Astro Boy would be smashed into pieces, let alone a human body. Renbochin had a deep understanding of the Empress's strength. She was definitely at the level of a Tyrannosaurus in human form. He did not know how she could be so powerful at her age. At the same time, he felt that it was a pity. That Long Wanli had a pretty good appearance. He was dressed in a green robe. Even though he could not see his face, he could feel that he was an elegant person just by looking at his back view. In particular, his sword was like a flying immortal. It was a pity that he was killed with a single slap. Now, even his corpse was buried under the plaza. Why didn't you move the corpse to another place for burial? Renbochin asked. He felt awkward about burying corpses under the plaza. Why? Burying the enemy's corpses under the ground will strengthen the fate of Deo, Caretaker Sure said. He had to admit that this was the difference between the cultures of the two worlds. On Earth, if there were corpses buried under the ground, people would feel uncomfortable. But here, they felt that it could strengthen the fate of Deo. This made Renbochin speechless. Will someone come to take revenge? Renbochin asked again. Just bury them together. Caretaker Sure laughed mischievously. He was completely unconcerned about Renbochin's question. Not long after the two of them returned to the Beast Park, Renbochin was summoned to the palace. The person who came to summon him was an acquaintance, Sure Hu. He had met him a few times before. I want to present this to Her Majesty, Renbochin said as he patted the air cooler. What is this? Sure Hu was puzzled. Renbochin pulled the cord of the air cooler. As the fan rotated, wind immediately blew out. Sure Hu looked at it curiously and said, it's much more convenient than using a fan. Naturally, Renbochin replied. Even though this thing wasn't very advanced and wasn't complicated to make, it was a new and interesting way of thinking that the ancients didn't have. Furthermore, the wind was natural, and the duration of the air cooler was much better than using a fan. Renbochin carried the air cooler and followed Sure Hu into the palace. They went straight to the imperial kitchen. I'll go back and report to Her Majesty. She might summon you later, Sure Hu said to Renbochin before leaving. Thank you. Renbochin smiled. After entering the imperial kitchen, Renbochin placed the air cooler at one side. A few cooks saw something novel and wanted to study it. However, they were all kicked away by Renbochin. Everyone laughed and didn't seem to mind. Even though the people of Deo had violent tendencies, they were rather straightforward after acknowledging him. They didn't mind some jokes. This made Renbochin feel that they were pretty good. They were much easier to deal with than the people of the modern world. Even though they had only interacted a few times, after taking out those seasonings and making a few new dishes, the cooks in the imperial kitchen had acknowledged Renbochin wholeheartedly. If not for Her Majesty saying that she had other arrangements for Renbochin, Caretaker Go would have wanted to transfer him to the imperial kitchen. Braised dragon scale fish. Renbochin was sure that this was a carp with 2 extra whiskers. After it was done, Renbochin tasted it. There wasn't any fishy smell at all. It melted in his mouth and was fresh and fragrant. He made up his mind to go to the market to buy a few more. Even if it was expensive, the taste was worth it. Sweet and sour pork, moose shoe pork, and white fungus soup. After finishing the 4 dishes, Renbochin went to take a rest. Even though the cooks in the imperial kitchen were in charge of making the dishes and he was in charge of mouthing them. Not long after the dishes were served, Shirhu came to the imperial kitchen to look for Renbochin. Her Majesty summons you in. Bring your box. Chapter 54. Me, that's a good thing. It means it's going to be popular. I didn't expect my book review section to be flooded one day. I'm a little excited just thinking about it. Once it's popular, I can get a new wife. Everyone knows that people don't necessarily say anything when they're in a daze. Especially when I wrote an old book until 4 in the morning and only slept for 3 hours. Chapter 55. Renbochin carried the box into the main hall. The Empress was wearing a red muslin dress with a white undergarment underneath. Her hair was simply tied up at the back of her head and she was concentrating on her dinner. It was as if she did not see Renbochin coming in. Renbochin could only stand there and wait with the box in his arms. After the incident in the afternoon, Renbochin's impression of the Empress changed greatly when he saw her again. Previously, he only felt that this Empress was of noble status. Even though she could send a polar bear flying with a slap, Renbochin was rather surprised. However, after seeing the brute force of the Dayo people, Renbochin was somewhat used to it. But today, after that so-called expert who came out of nowhere to challenge him, the Empress had already risen to the level of a humanoid Tyrannosaurus in his heart, second only to a super scion. Today, Renbochin obediently stood there with his head lowered. He did not even lift his head and stared at the box as he entered the main hall. This box looked much more beautiful under the illumination of the lanterns. The galaxy on the box was glowing with starlight. After the Empress finished her dinner, she said, "Today's dinner dishes are not bad. Cook the same dishes tomorrow." Her voice was cold. "Yes." Caretaker Go bowed and took away the dinner. "Come up. Why are you so well-behaved today?" The Empress's cold voice sounded. Previously, even though he clearly knew that the Empress was in front of him, even though he clearly knew that accompanying a monarch was like accompanying a tiger, but since he came from the real world, Renbochin still had many habits that were hard to change, such as looking around and so on. Usually, when he was telling a story, as the story progressed, he would often make all kinds of hand gestures, which made the Empress feel rather amused. Dayo itself did not pay much attention to etiquette, so she did not feel that he was being rude. Therefore, when she saw him looking downwards and being so well-behaved today, the Empress felt that it was a little strange. Renbochin hurriedly said, "I was just thinking that your Majesty's martial arts are matchless and your might is world-shaking. Today, this kind of rascal actually dared to challenge your Majesty. He is really overestimating himself. He came all the way to Dayo just to let your Majesty display your exceptional martial arts to deter the rascal. At the same time, he can relax from handling state affairs and worrying about the people. From this point of view, he has succeeded and is considered to have made a contribution to Dayo. I wonder if his contributions to Dayo should be recorded in the annals of history." Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan, who were behind the Empress, covered their mouths and giggled softly. They looked at Renbochin with interest. Not only did he know how to tell stories, but he was also very funny when he spoke. The corner of the Empress's mouth curled up slightly, but she immediately retracted it. Renbochin guessed that she should be in a good mood at this moment. It seemed that ever since his previous attempt at bootlicking failed miserably, his painstaking research had finally yielded some results. He felt slightly proud of himself. He still had some potential in this area. Following which, he carried the box and walked to the bottom of the stone steps. The Empress raised her head and saw the dark blue box that was decorated with galaxies. She was very interested and asked, "Is this what you want to present to me? What is it?" At the mention of the box in his hands, Renbochin became more spirited. He raised his head and said, "This is an air cooler." The weather was scorching hot now. Ordinary people were like this, not to mention the Empress, who was in the palace handling the affairs of Dayo every day and working hard for the welfare of millions of people. After much consideration, I specially made this air cooler to present to your Majesty. Following which, he took 2 steps forward and placed the box not far from the Empress. He said, "Your Majesty, I have been impolite. I still need some crushed ice and half a basin of water." "Qing Yuan. Hong Yuan," the Empress called out softly. Immediately, the maid from before nodded at Renbochin and went to fetch the water. Another maid then placed the basin of ice beside Renbochin's hand. Renbochin opened the lid, added the ice and water in succession, and then covered the lid. After a while, he reckoned that the ice water should have soaked through the cloth. He directly pulled the string on top of the fan. Immediately, the cold air was blown to the Empress's body along with the wind. The Empress let out a soft cry of surprise. She took 2 steps forward with great interest. Feeling the cold wind blowing on her body, she squinted her eyes, which appeared somewhat long and narrow. She had a satisfied look on her face. At this moment, her expression didn't make her look so heroic. After squinting her long and narrow eyes, she looked a little more gentle and charming. Her entire person looked beautiful and alluring. However, this was only for a moment. The Empress took a few steps forward again. She was separated from Renbochin by a box. Renbochin could even smell the fragrance coming from her body. His mind was slightly stirred, and he immediately restrained his mind. Renbochin felt that he was about to become an old monk sitting still. The Empress opened the lid and looked at the structure inside. Then, she turned around and returned to the couch with a trace of a rare gentle smile on her face. "If you put this thing a little further in, it would be rather cool to use. You are very considerate. Thank you for your praise, Your Majesty." Renbochin lowered his head. "Well, continue with your story," the Empress said while lying on the couch. "Yes." Renbochin began to narrate the story while the Empress listened attentively while lying on the couch. As Renbochin narrated the story, the Empress didn't have any expression. However, the eyes of Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan lit up. Obviously, both of them were extremely interested in this story. Their mood also fluctuated along with the fate of each character in the story. After listening for a long time, the Empress waved her hand and asked, "Is there any other story?" After all, from her point of view, all those schemes and stratagems were nothing more than a sword. Those so-called valiant generals were equivalent to the ordinary soldiers of Dayo. It was just like listening to a group of ants fighting. At first, it was still somewhat fresh, but after a few days, it became somewhat boring. Hearing what the Empress said, the 2 maids were slightly disappointed. Both of them felt that this story was pretty good. Renbochin wasn't engrossed in his storytelling today. He had been paying attention to the Empress. Seeing that she waved her hand, he immediately stopped and nodded his head in agreement. "Since it's like this, let me tell Your Majesty about the investiture of the gods," Renbochin said. Originally, he wanted to talk about the journey to the west, but there were too many things that needed to be explained. It would be better to talk about the investiture of the gods first and then follow up with the journey to the west. "What is it about?" the Empress asked. "It's about the ancient investiture of the gods," Renbochin replied. He thought that the martial arts level of the investiture of the gods was definitely high enough. The Empress was rather interested and said, "Oh, then let's talk about this." "Yes." Renbocchen opened his mouth and started from Panga's creation of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors to give the Empress an idea. When he talked about how Su Hu rebelled against the Shang dynasty because he wanted him to offer his daughter, the Empress faintly sighed and said, "Exactly. Wasn't the founding of Dao because of this?" These words made Renbocchen slightly stunned. He really wasn't clear about what happened before the founding of Dao. He only knew from caretaker Shi's words that Dao was originally made up of aboriginals and was founded 70 years ago. He wasn't clear about the specifics. He wasn't sure if it was because she was reminiscing about the past, but the Empress listened even more attentively. This investiture of the gods was much more interesting to her than the romance of the 3 kingdoms. Especially after Zhengluan's 2 beams of white light that sucked people's souls, Chong Heihu's vision blurred, and he fell off his horse and was captured by Zhengluan. This kind of story was extremely interesting to the Empress. She said, "These things in China are rather similar to Great Xia. It is said that there are also strange people in Great Xia, but they are rarely seen. Furthermore, China and Great Xia sound similar." Renbocchen hurriedly said, "China is millions of miles away from Dao, it's just a coincidence of the names." The Empress nodded her head in agreement and continued listening to the story. In the end, after hearing Ji Chang's persuasion and Su Hu's agreement to gift his daughter, she immediately raised her eyebrows and slapped the back of the couch. Immediately, wood splinters flew everywhere and the back of the couch was smashed into pieces by her slap. This Ji Chang's words are better than his singing. First, Su Hu rebelled, then he wanted to gift his daughter. He's neither a minister nor a father, he's hesitant and fickle. Renbocchen shrunk his neck. This investiture of the gods wasn't written by him, so he couldn't be blamed. He didn't expect her to have such a big reaction when she heard this part. Combined with what the Empress said about Su Hu rebelling against the Shang dynasty, Renbocchen felt that there might be a connection. Presumably, it was related to the reason why the first emperor of Dao revolted. Chapter 56. Renbocchen listened to a portion of Romance of the 3 Kingdoms and 3 chapters of Investiture of the Gods. The sky was already dark by then. Before leaving the palace, Renbocchen hesitated whether he should tell the Empress about the salt well. However, after thinking about it, he was only 50% confident. If he messed it up, it might affect his value in the Empress's heart. In the end, he decided that it would be better to wait until his position was higher before using this method to exchange for credit. If he did it after the sweet potatoes were ripe, even if he failed, the impact wouldn't be too great. Renbocchen returned to the beast park, found some mutton to eat, and went to bed. The next morning, he took his camera and walked around the beast park, taking pictures of all the beautiful places. He didn't dare to take pictures of the animals in the beast park. After all, many of them were different from those on Earth. If he took pictures and uploaded them on the internet, it would be too easy to expose himself. Renbocchen's current situation was that he had to hide his abilities even if he wanted to show off. Thinking about what the Empress said last night, Renbocchen was suddenly interested in the history of Dao. He went to ask Tinghulu and Tai Dao. The 2 of them were guarding a few big wooden basins and resting in a cool place. The basins were filled with animal hides that were being soaked. After hearing Renbocchen's inquiry, the 2 of them told him some of the things they knew. Renbocchen knew that most of the people in Dao were originally aboriginals. 70 years ago, the Dao people that Renbocchen saw now were actually aboriginals, but they were called barbarians by the outside world. They mainly lived in villages scattered in the 60,000 mountains in the west and south of Dao and made a living by hunting. It was a vast and continuous mountain range that surrounded the west and most of the south of the current Dao nation. There were countless ferocious beasts and many aboriginal strongholds in the mountain range. There was originally a country on this plain called the Hao Nation. At that time, the Hao Nation had been founded for more than 300 years and was extravagant. The king of the Hao Nation was as licentious as King Zhou of Shang. The Aboriginal women were usually strong and had outstanding looks. They were completely different from the weak women of the Hao Nation and had a unique flavor. The Hao Nation's emperor listened to someone and ordered the Aboriginals to offer up 100 women. Otherwise, he would send troops to attack. Furthermore, the Aboriginals were not under the jurisdiction of the Hao Nation. Furthermore, with their bad tempers, they naturally did not care about this matter. They even beat the messenger half dead and threw him down the mountain. The emperor of the Hao Nation was enraged when he received the report and immediately sent out 50,000 troops to suppress them. He also gave the order to annihilate the village and to send the young women back to the capital for him to enjoy. The Aboriginals were organized in strongholds, and they didn't have much defense either. 5 strongholds were destroyed on the spot, and the people in the strongholds were all slaughtered while the women were taken away. Furthermore, the Hao Nation's army was still advancing into the forest. It was only at this time that the Aboriginals reacted. Their anger spread like wildfire in the mountain range. The Aboriginals who heard the news gathered together. However, there wasn't enough time, and the number of people who could gather wasn't too many. Relying on the special characteristics of the mountain forest, they set up layers of interception. After the Hao Nation's army broke through the 3rd layer, they were stopped by the 4th layer and could not advance any further. Both sides had suffered great losses. Although the individual strength of the barbarians was strong, they had lost thousands of people in the face of an army of 50,000. The Hao Nation's army wasn't used to fighting in the forest, so their losses were even greater. Almost 10,000 of them were buried in the forest. At this time, the person who persuaded the Hao Nation's emperor to conscript the women once again gave him a plan. Why did the Aboriginals dare to disobey the Hao Nation's emperor? It was because the barbarians hunted, wore animal skins, and picked wild fruits for a living. They didn't need anything from the outside world and could live freely in the forest. The Hao Nation couldn't send out troops to suppress them. Otherwise, the situation would be the same as now. If the Hao Nation wanted the barbarians to submit, they had to make it impossible for them to survive in the forest. They had no choice but to obey the Hao Nation. There was an unknown number of barbarians in the mountain range, but there was one thing that all of them needed: salt. There was a piece of rock salt in the mountain range, and almost all the salt used by the Aboriginals came from there. As long as they poisoned the rock salt, the Aboriginals would have to listen to the Hao Nation's emperor if they wanted salt. It could be considered as subduing the enemy without a fight. The Hao Nation's emperor was overjoyed when he heard this and immediately carried out the plan. At the same time, he had another thought. Although the Hao Nation was strong against the Aboriginals, it was still weaker than the Yun Nation and the Chin Nation. If he could get the Aboriginals to join the army, it would be very effective in attacking cities and strongholds. In the end, the Aboriginals suffered heavy losses after the salt was poisoned. Half of the stronghold where Dao Nation's first emperor, Yupeng, lived was either dead or injured. After his grief, he immediately contacted the other strongholds to revolt. They bypassed the tens of thousands of soldiers in the forest and launched a sneak attack on a city near the mountain range. Now, both sides could be said to have a blood feud. At this time, a person came to seek refuge with Yupeng, saying that the Hao Nation's emperor destroyed his family and wanted revenge. At first, Yupeng sent people to watch over the other party and guard against him. Later on, when he saw that the other party was sincere in his plans and even destroyed the 40,000 soldiers, Yupeng began to trust him. At this time, the anger of the Aboriginals had subsided a little. After the 40,000 soldiers were destroyed, there was no longer a threat to their survival. However, the rock salt was poisonous and could only be obtained by plundering cities. Therefore, all the strongholds had to unite and plunder. It had to be said that this was the Hao Nation's emperor's doing. The Aboriginals' losses also started to increase. At this time, that person gave advice to Yupeng. He said that this couldn't go on. They couldn't always rely on plundering to obtain salt. It was better to first occupy a few cities and hold them. Only then would they have the capital to negotiate and obtain salt from the Yun nation and the Qin nation. When Yupeng heard this, he agreed. He then contacted a few strongholds located in the depths of the mountain range. With that person as the military advisor, they went down the mountain to attack the strongholds and occupied 4 cities in a row. As the Han nation's 50,000 soldiers in the southwest had been completely annihilated, the remaining soldiers had to guard the east and north. At the same time, the Han nation's emperor was licentious and tyrannical. There was a rebellion in the region and they had to send troops to suppress it. Furthermore, the Han nation's emperor thought that the barbarians were only robbing some things and that the key was to quell the rebellion. Therefore, he didn't pay much attention to these barbarians. As a result, these cities were captured without much effort. At this time, that military advisor spoke again. The aboriginals' lives were in the hands of others. No matter who became the emperor, if the barbarians weren't exchanged for salt, the barbarians could only rebel again. This would never end. Furthermore, this was a great opportunity. The Han nation's upper echelons were corrupt, their army was weak, and there was chaos in the country. It was better to directly occupy the palace and behead the main culprit. This way, they could establish a nation and the descendants of the barbarians could live and work in peace and contentment. At that time, under this person's plan, the barbarians didn't suffer heavy losses regardless of whether it was annihilating the 40,000 soldiers or capturing the cities. The aboriginals trusted him and were persuaded. The aboriginals, who had never thought of this before, were tempted after hearing this idea. These days, they were envious of the prosperity they saw in the various cities. This person was also a strategist. Their current military strength was somewhat insufficient and they had to contact the aboriginals in the depths of the mountain range. At the same time, if they attacked now, the Han nation's attention would be focused on them. It was better to occupy these cities first and pretend that they wouldn't attack anymore. Then, they could contact the merchants from the Yun nation and the Qin nation to exchange the resources in these cities for salt. This way, the Han nation's emperor would definitely let down his guard and eliminate the rebellion in the country first. After hearing this, Yuping felt that this was a good idea. Although the barbarians in the depths of the 60,000 mountains had other ways to obtain salt and wouldn't be so easily persuaded, he still sent a few people to persuade them. The reality was just as he said. The Han nation's emperor didn't expect the aboriginals to dare to plot against him and focused all his energy on suppressing the rebellion. Another 8 months passed. During this half a year, the aboriginals stayed in these cities and didn't attack again. This made the Han nation's emperor feel relieved. The war in the country was getting more and more intense. He mobilized all the available troops to suppress the rebellion. Only a small portion of the troops guarded the north and east. At this moment, a large number of aboriginal soldiers walked out from the depths of the mountains and met up with Yupeng and the others. Then, they set off for the imperial city. These aboriginal soldiers from the depths of the mountain range were more powerful because of the harsh living environment and the presence of all kinds of ferocious beasts. During this period of time, they attacked the cities and waded through the rivers. Among them, the 2 most difficult passes were opened by people in the middle of the night. It turned out that the military counselor had already arranged people inside without anyone knowing. After 10 days, the barbarian army fought their way to the imperial city and finally executed the Han nation's emperor in public. Initially, Yupeng and the aboriginals only wanted revenge and to plunder daily necessities. In the end, under the incitement of the military advisor, the Han nation was destroyed. When the Han nation's emperor saw the military advisor, he was extremely shocked. When he found out that the military advisor was the aboriginals' military advisor, he became even crazier and shouted out everything. At this moment, everyone realized that the person who provoked the How Nation's emperor to demand 100 women from the Aboriginals and poisoned the stone salt was this military advisor. The military advisor didn't stop or defend himself and allowed the How Nation's emperor to reveal everything. After the How Nation's emperor finished speaking, he revealed another piece of shocking news. He was the one who arranged a few of the rebellions in the How Nation. He was also in contact with the other rebel armies. His goal was to destroy the How Nation. He had planned all of this for a total of 15 years. In addition to the 2 years of military campaigns, he had planned for a total of 17 years. At this moment, it could be said that everyone was fooled by him, including the How Nation's emperor, the Aboriginals, and even the rebel armies. Chapter 57. Rinpoche's heart skipped a beat as he listened to the story. He recalled how heroic the military advisor was back then. He single-handedly destroyed an entire nation and toyed with the troops of several parties. Such a person was indeed admirable. What happened next? Rinpoche asked. He really wanted to know what happened to the military advisor. Such a powerful person would definitely have arranged a way out for himself, right? Also, why did the military advisor do all these things? Later on, after the military advisor told everyone everything, he smiled and committed suicide by consuming poison in the face of everyone's anger. After his death, Yiping found a few pieces of paper in his room. The paper included the arrangements for what happened after that and the reason why he did all these things. Rinpoche did not expect such an ending. That person actually committed suicide by consuming poison in the end. However, some people said that they saw him somewhere else. He faked his death that day. Who knows? Tai Dao shrugged his shoulders. Rinpoche was more convinced of this ending. How could a person with such a plan die just like that? Perhaps he really faked his death to escape and wandered the world incognito. Caretaker Ren, do you know why Her Majesty's surname is Chi? Tinghulu laughed. Rinpoche knew that Tinghulu must have a reason for asking this question. Combining it with the previous story, he suddenly had an idea. Could it be that person's surname is Chi? Yes. After the death of his family, the late emperor had no more worries. He did not expect to become the emperor one day. After the death of the military advisor, he changed his surname to Qi. Some people said that the late emperor changed his surname after reading the contents of the paper. What was written on the paper? Rinpoche asked curiously. He had always wanted to know why that person would do such a thing and even lose his life in the end. It could not be because he was a noble, pure, moral person, a person who was free from vulgar interests, and a person who was beneficial to the people. His entire life's plan was for the rise of the Aboriginals and the establishment of Deo, right? I don't know. Perhaps only Her Majesty knows now. Tinghulu shook his head and said, some people say that he is a mixed blood of the How Nation and my people. How do you know so much? Rinpoche asked curiously. Logically, these things should not be spread to everyone, right? My ancestor was in the army that year and even attacked the palace, Tinghulu said. He told my grandfather, and my grandfather told me. Me too. Tai Dao nodded. What happened to the How Nation and the rebel soldiers? Rinpoche asked again. Some of them have fled to the Yun Nation, the Chin Nation, and Great Xia, while the rest are living in the south, Tinghulu said. They're in the south. Does it also belong to Deo? Rinpoche asked curiously. In any case, everyone knew that he was an outsider and knew nothing about Deo. There was no need for him to hide anything. If they were curious, they could just ask directly. The plains in the south near the 60,000 mountains are all Deo Aboriginals, and their numbers are about the same as the Aboriginals of Deo. Of course, they're from Deo, but they're not content with their lot. At first, Tinghulu was a little uncertain. Later on, when he mentioned that those people were restless, his eyes were filled with killing intent. Tai Dao, who was standing at the side, sneered. This was the first time Rinpochen saw such expressions on their faces. It seemed like there was a huge conflict between the Aboriginals and the Hao Nation in Deo. However, thinking about it, no matter how licentious and tyrannical the Hao Nation's emperor was, he was still a civilized nation. No matter what, he would not be willing to let the entire nation be destroyed by the barbarians in the mountains. In the history of China, weren't there many people with lofty ideals who fought against the Qing and restored the Ming? From the bottom of his heart, Rinpochen more or less sympathized with those people from the Hao Nation. However, it seemed like he was on the same side as the Aboriginals and had even integrated into them. Rinpochen could only sympathize with them in his heart. This was also because they had the same history. He himself did not have any sense of identity with the Hao Nation. Both sides were very unfamiliar to him, but he was closer to the Aboriginals. Rinpochen calculated in his heart. There were 30 to 40 million people in Deo, but he did not know if that included the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation. After asking, he confirmed that it indeed included the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation. In this case, there were only 10 to 20 million Aboriginals, and most of them were in the mountains. However, no one knew exactly how many Aboriginals there were in the 60,000 mountains. The 60,000 mountains were really too big. The deeper one went, the steeper it became. There were also more ferocious beasts, and they were all very powerful. Until now, no one had passed through the 60,000 mountains to see what the other side was like. Currently, the Aboriginals only included the Aboriginal strongholds deep in the mountains from which the troops were deployed. Rinpochen asked a few more questions, and both of them answered. Finally, Rinpochen had a certain understanding of the situation in Deo. The original Hao Nation soldiers and the rebel army were defeated 3 times in the war with the Aboriginals, and the rebel army was almost completely wiped out. If it weren't for the fact that the Aboriginals also suffered heavy losses, the restlessness of the other nations, and Great Xia directly dispatched troops to occupy a few border cities, the Aboriginals would probably have wiped them all out. Under such circumstances, both sides took a step back. The rebel army and the majority of the Hao Nation soldiers in the south were similar to an autonomous system. This was arranged according to the last contents of the paper left by the military advisor. They could have a small number of troops, and the Hao Nation soldiers would govern the Hao Nation internally. However, the largest area they could control was the area of a city. A small number of troops could be maintained in the city, but the number of troops and equipment were considerably limited. In addition, the Aboriginals were superior to them in other aspects and weren't strict. On the whole, Deo still maintained the simplicity of the Aboriginals and wasn't harsh on the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation. In fact, other than the monarch of the Hao Nation, they didn't have any resentment towards the ordinary people. As such, the overall situation was that the Aboriginals would govern themselves, don't cause trouble, and don't play any tricks. The Aboriginals couldn't be bothered to deal with them. If anything happened, the Aboriginals would immediately arrive. Even so, there were still people who didn't give up and would occasionally play tricks. In addition to the blood feud from the previous few wars, the conflict had become more and more intense over the years. Of course, the most important point was that there weren't any remnant citizens of the Hao Nation in the imperial court of Deo. The highest position a remnant citizen of the Hao Nation could achieve was to become the lord of a city and guard that small piece of land. The remnant citizens of the Hao Nation rarely lived in other places. Both parties didn't integrate at all, and it seemed like the Aboriginals didn't have any intention of integrating the other party into their own. This was also one of the reasons why they weren't content with their lot. After all, there would always be people with ambitions and aspirations. Being the lord of a city wasn't enough to satisfy them. After all, the lord of a city was still in that small piece of land, and there would always be people who wanted a bigger sky. However, these weren't things that Rinpoche needed to worry about. From these past events, Rinpoche could roughly guess why the Empress had such a big reaction after hearing about the investiture of the gods. There were many aspects that were very similar to what the Aboriginals had experienced. As the three of them sat and chatted, three burly men dressed as imperial guards walked over from a distance. The one in front was Shirhu. When Rinpoche saw them, he stood up and was about to welcome them when he heard Shirhu say, "Rinpoche, receive the imperial edict." Rinpoche was dumbfounded when he heard this. He completely didn't know what to do. Should he kneel on one knee, or both knees, or receive the edict while standing? He had no experience at all. Caretaker Ren, kneel on one knee and receive the edict. Shirhu knew Rinpoche's situation and reminded him in a soft voice. Rinpoche quickly did as he was told. Shirhu then unrolled a scroll that was black on the sides and white in the middle. The Imperial Edict of the Dayo Emperor declares that Rinpoche is a storyteller for Qingshin Palace Hall. Rinpoche was at a loss after hearing this. What was going on with storytelling in Qingshin Palace Hall? Could it be that there was an official who was responsible for telling stories to the Emperor? Caretaker Ren, why aren't you receiving the Imperial Edict? Shirhu whispered. Your subject, receive the Imperial Edict. Rinpoche quickly raised both of his hands, just like how it was shown on television. After receiving the scroll, Rinpoche's mind was still in a daze. He didn't know what exactly was going on. He had definitely been promoted. Previously, he was still a nobody. Now, he could receive the Imperial Edict. This was definitely a promotion. Then what? What was he going to do? Where was he going to stay? Sir Ren, congratulations. Shirhu cupped his fists and said. Brother Shir, please don't call me sir. Just call me Brother Ren. Rinpoche pulled Shirhu to one side and asked, Brother Shir, what kind of official position is this? Shirhu shook his head with a strange expression and replied, I don't know. Chapter 58. It's written on the edict. Shirhu pointed at the edict. Rinpoche opened the edict. There were dozens of words on it, but he couldn't recognize any of them. He remembered that Shirhu didn't say more than 20 words when he read the edict. There were at least 40 to 50 words on the edict. What does it say? Before Rinpoche came here, he never thought he would be illiterate. His English had passed level 4, and he could even understand a few words of Japanese, yamit. I don't know. Shirhu looked serious and reliable. However, Rinpoche was dumbfounded after hearing his words. You don't know. Rinpoche almost shouted. I can't read. Shirhu said matter-of-factly. Rinpoche opened his mouth wide and his tonsils almost popped out. Although he didn't know what his official position was, Caretaker Go of the Imperial Kitchen respected him a lot since he often came out to summon Rinpoche to the palace hall. With this kind of status, it would be considered low to call him a palace guard. Furthermore, the two soldiers just now obviously treated him as their leader. How could such a person be illiterate? Then what you said just now, it was dictated by Her Majesty, Shirhu said solemnly. Brother Shir, what do you know? Rinpoche's face twitched for a long time. From what Her Majesty said just now, Brother Ren, your official position is from Great Xia. This is the first time in Dayo that it's a reward. It's considered a secondary class, rank 8, and you receive a salary from the palace. Shirhu finally knew something. He felt a little embarrassed after saying that he didn't know anything. Then what do I have to do? Where do I stay? Rinpoche was still at a loss. His current residence was in the Beast Park. If he couldn't stay in the Beast Park in the future, where would he stay? Furthermore, without Tinghulu and Tai Dao, even with the electric baton, he didn't feel very safe. Her Majesty did say that because you have other responsibilities, you will stay in the Beast Park and wait at Qingshin Palace Hall every afternoon. Where is Qingshin Palace Hall? Ren Baqian asked. It's the place where the palace books are kept. Here is a token. Hand it to the palace guards at noon and someone will bring you there. Sherhu took out a token from his waist. Don't lose it. You'll need this token to enter and leave the palace. Ren Baqian stretched out his hand to catch it. It wasn't a big plate, but it was very heavy and cold to the touch. He didn't know what kind of metal it was made of, but its surface was suffused with a silver glow. In any case, the fact that they were still staying in the Beast Park made Ren Baqian feel more at ease. He was more familiar with this place and felt more secure here. It was just that he didn't have much time to go out in the future. Also, he would disappear once every 3 days. Even though the Empress knew about it and said that she wouldn't pursue the matter, he still felt that it was somewhat dangerous. It seemed like he still had to show his worth, lest the Empress suddenly couldn't find him and beheaded him in a bad mood. Thank you, Brother Sher. Please wait for me for a while. Ren Baqian cupped his hands in obeisance and thanked Shermu. Then, he ran into the house and grabbed a handful of silver. Back then, he had used a saw blade to cut off the large ingots of silver, and now he only had this kind of broken silver. According to what was said on TV, at this time, it was necessary to bribe the person who came to announce the decree with money. From the perspective of human relations, it would not be a loss to offer him a handful of silver. Brother Ren is a quick-witted person. I won't stand on ceremony, I will look for you for a drink another day. Sherhu laughed heartily and patted Ren Baqian's shoulder. Then, he stuffed the handful of silver to the 2 imperial guards behind him and said, "This is from Brother Ren. Take it back and drink with you." "Thank you, Sir Ren." The 2 imperial guards received the silver and laughed. They looked at Ren Baqian with a gaze full of goodwill. It seemed like no matter where, money could do a lot of things. Of course, Sherhu's reputation was also involved in this. I shall not stay any longer, I still have to report back. Sherhu cupped his hands in obeisance to Ren Baqian, turned around and left with the 2 imperial guards. After Sherhu left, Tinghulu and Tai Dao went forward to congratulate Ren Baqian. Congratulations, Caretaker Ren. From now on, you will have to call you Sir Ren. Ren Baqian touched the token. Until now, he still felt that it was a little unreal. He had risen from a mediocre official to a secondary class, rank 8 official just like that. His rank was even higher than Caretaker Sher's. However, Ren Baqian obviously had an official position and was receiving a salary. His authority was much lower than Caretaker Sher's. In any case, he was still an official. Previously, he had told stories for so many days and did not mention that he would be rewarded. Yet, he was rewarded today. He did not know if it was because of the air cooler or his bootlicking skills. It was more likely that there were various reasons. Ren Baqian returned to his room and took out 2 ingots of silver and threw them to the 2. Happy to see this. The 2 of them grabbed the silver and laughed. Sir Ren's official robe has not been delivered yet. You still have to go to the palace in the afternoon. I reckon it will be delivered before noon, Tinghulu said. Ren Baqian nodded. He had forgotten to ask about this matter just now. He was still inexperienced. He then asked curiously, what is the official position of that Sherhu who announced the imperial edict? He is a palace guard, but it seems like he will be promoted soon, Tinghulu said. He then added, the palace guards are secondary class, rank 5. They are the most elite warriors who are good at fighting. However, they only have ranks and no official positions. They are different from people like Sir Ren. Not long after, Caretaker Sher heard the news and rushed over. He cupped his fists and greeted Renbochin. "Greetings, Sir Ren." "Caretaker sure, don't give me the cold shoulder," Renbochin hurriedly said. "Just call me Brother Ren." "That won't do. Now that your official position is higher than mine, I still have to address you as I should." Caretaker sure laughed heartily. "Sir Ren is having a joyous occasion today. Later, get the kitchen to prepare a few tables so that everyone can bask in the joyous atmosphere." Tai Dao and Ting Hulu immediately went to inform Caretaker Sure. "All right, there is no one else. Brother Sure, just call me Brother Ren. This official position is a reward." "It is much worse than yours," Renbochin said. "In that case, I will still call you Brother Ren in the future." Sure who patted Renbochin's shoulder. He almost slapped Renbochin into the ground. Renbochin's entire body immediately fell askew. Renbochin reckoned that his shoulder would swell up after this slap. "Oh yes, Caretaker Sure, I am afraid I can no longer take up my position in the Beast Park. In the future, I will hand over the ice cellar to Caretaker Sure. As for those people, I will make arrangements for the ice cellar. Those 3 people in charge of the ice cellar will stay there. Out of the other 7, 5 will follow you. After all, there are still a few acres of land. I will arrange for the other 2 to do other things," Caretaker Sure immediately said. "In that case, many thanks. Leave Ting Hulu and Tai Dao with me," Renbochin smiled. He was already familiar with Ting Hulu and Tai Dao. Renbochin still had some messy jobs that he had to hand over to the 2 of them to do. For example, skin tanning. He was even preparing to make a sofa. Renbochin touched the so-called Imperial Edict in his hand and asked tentatively without any expectations, "Caretaker Sure, can you read?" Chapter 59. Renbochin had to admit that the basic quality of education in Dayo was indeed worrying. In any case, it had already been 70 years since the founding of Dayo. Not many people were literate. Take a look at China. Before the founding of the People's Republic, the literacy rate was not high. 70 years later, although not everyone was literate, it was almost the same. In any case, Caretaker Sure was the chief caretaker of the Beast Park. He was a rank 9 martial artist and had dozens of subordinates. Including his family members, there were more than 100 of them. Can't even read. And that Sure who just now was a secondary class 5 imperial bodyguard who was illiterate. Renbochin was really doubtful about how they were going to convey documents and orders. They couldn't possibly just rely on oral instructions, right? When it was almost noon, 2 people from the palace came to deliver Renbochin's official robes. It was a set of clothes that was mainly black with a red collar and cuffs. There was even a bird pattern on it. The material was much softer than what Renbochin was wearing now. Furthermore, it felt smooth and felt like silk. The style was not that of ancient Chinese robes with big sleeves. Although the clothes were longer, reaching the knees, the sleeves were only slightly wider than ordinary clothes. After Renbochin changed into it, he couldn't see whether it looked good or not. However, the breathability and comfort were much better than before. The only thing that made him feel a little uncomfortable was that he was a little fat. The people of Dayo were all tall and sturdy. Their arms were strong enough to run a horse. Compared to them, Renbochin's physique was more than an order of magnitude lower. The clothes he wore made him look a little fat. Caretaker Sure was stunned when he saw Renbochin come out after changing his clothes. Soon after, he burst out laughing. Renbochin got goosebumps from his laughter. He didn't think he was wearing the wrong clothes, right? "Look for me tonight, I'll get someone to help you change it." Caretaker Sure laughed heartily. Renbochin gestured at his baggy official robe and roughly knew why Caretaker Sure laughed. If he were to wear such big clothes, he would probably look like a monkey wearing a robe. However, he had to go to Qingshin Palace Hall at noon. It seemed like he could only change it after he returned. They had lunch as a form of celebration for Renbaqian. Although that was the case, the food was no different from usual. The only difference was that there were more spices, which made the food more fragrant. The banquet was lively. Even though Renbaqian hadn't stayed here for a long time, he was beginning to integrate into the culture. Seeing the sincere congratulatory smiles on everyone's faces, he felt a surge of warmth in his heart. These people were really too cute. Renbaqian, who was still sighing just a second ago, immediately grabbed the stool to cover his chest and shouted, "Who's using their dirty claws to slap me again?" His face was filled with the words, "If you dare slap me with your oily claws again, I'll smash your face with a stool." After the meal, Renbaqian cupped his hands at everyone and entered the palace with a body full of claw marks. There was nothing he could do about it. He only had one set of official robes, and he didn't even have a change of clothes. Time was up. Renbaqian clenched his teeth and left. Fortunately, the greasy claw print on the black robe was a little more conspicuous under the sunlight. If it was inside the hall, one would not be able to see it without looking carefully. He passed the token to the palace gate guards for inspection. The two of them asked him to wait for a while. One of them took the token and went in for 2 or 3 minutes before coming out empty-handed. Then, the two of them and Renbaqian stared at each other as they waited. The two of them looked at Renbaqian, who was wearing an oversized official robe and had a body full of shiny, greasy claw marks. Their faces twitched. If they didn't know that they were the face of the palace and needed to maintain their manners, they would probably be lying there laughing. Anyway, Renbaqian couldn't see what he looked like, so he let them be. This robe was still quite comfortable. After waiting for a while, a female official in her 30s or 40s hurried out. She looked at Renbaqian and almost spurted out her saliva. "Follow me." That female official threw the token back to Renbaqian and said while holding back her laughter. Just as Renbaqian entered the door, he heard 2 people laughing behind him. "Shouldn't you at least wait for me to walk further away before laughing? Otherwise, why did you endure for so long just now? All I have to do is turn my back on him, right?" Just now, he directly stood with his back facing them, and they wouldn't have to endure for so long. "How should I address you, sir?" Renbaqian followed behind and asked cautiously. He didn't know the identity of the person in front of him, but he was an official bestowed by the Empress. He was afraid that he would have to enter the palace frequently in the future. It was better to maintain a good relationship no matter what. "Don't call me sir, call me Keeper Sure. Keeper is my position." Keeper Sure turned around and glanced at Renbaqian. "I understand." Renbaqian nodded his head. It seemed like Keeper Sure was really a big surname. Not knowing the other party's temperament, Renbaqian didn't dare to say much. The two of them walked in silence for a while and arrived in front of a palace. Keeper Sure stopped, turned around and said, "This is the place. You can enter with the token." "Thank you." Renbaqian cupped his hands and walked into the palace hall. This palace hall was about 2 stories high. It looked rather tall and occupied a large area. After pushing open the door and entering the palace hall, Renbaqian saw a 16 or 17-year-old girl sitting behind a table. She was wearing the same clothes as the female official just now, and she was holding a paper book. She was reading very seriously. If it wasn't for the fact that she was drooling. Renbaqian felt that she was a talent to be able to sit there with that book in her hand and sleep so soundly. She didn't even know that he had pushed open the door and entered. What made Renbaqian even more astonished was that she could actually become a female official at such a young age. Renbaqian saw that she was sleeping soundly and didn't disturb her. After taking a closer look, this female official was quite good-looking. Compared to the common Dayo women, she gave off a warm and fragrant vibe. He wasn't sure if it was because she didn't spend much time under the sun, but her skin was fairer. Furthermore, she didn't have that heroic and wild aura between her brows. After which, Renbachien sized up the palace hall again. He saw that there were rows of rooms in the palace hall. The place where he was standing now was a passageway. However, the passageway was wider and was at least 3 meters wide. The rooms on both sides were made of hollow wood. He could see that there were many scrolls and books on the shelves inside. Some were made of animal skin and some were made of paper. Renbachien reckoned that they were all books. In that case, this should be the book vault. After sizing up the place, Renbachien had nothing to do. He leaned against the wall and stared blankly. After an unknown period of time, the book in the lady's hand fell to the ground with a thud. The lady woke up with a start. She hurriedly wiped her drool and bent over to pick up the book. She heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, she was the only one who saw it. Then, she saw a man looking at her with a kind smile. "Ah!" The girl's eyes suddenly widened like a frightened cat. Renbachien hurriedly put down the token in his hand and showed it to her. "I'm new here today." "Ah, I remember now." The lady suddenly realized and then hammered her own head. "I forgot about this. You are the new storyteller of Qingxin Palace Hall, right?" The lady said. Following which, she raised her head and said, "Why didn't you greet me when you came in?" It seemed like she was angry that someone saw her drooling while she was sleeping. "Seeing that you were sleeping soundly, I didn't have the nerve to greet you." Renbachien laughed. The lady fiercely glared at him. Chapter 60. Seeing that the other party didn't seem to want to talk to him, Renbachien asked, "May I know how to address you?" The female official thought for a while and seemed to feel that she might have to see this man in front of her every day for a period of time, so she said, "My name is Lin Chaola. Call me Librarian Li Lin. Ancient books." This was equivalent to a librarian, right? As Renbachien thought about it, he asked the question that he was concerned about. "Greetings, Librarian Lin. May I know what I'm here for?" "I don't know. Just find a place to stay and don't disturb me." "Wait for His Majesty to summon you into the palace hall," Lin Chaola said casually. After hearing this, Renbachien went to one side and stared blankly. After standing for a while, he got tired and sat on the ground. The ground inside seemed to be quite clean. Someone cleaned it every day, so there was not a speck of dust. Lin Chaola ignored him and sat there reading. Not long after, Renbachien noticed that her head was nodding bit by bit, and it looked like it was about to hit the table. Renbachien was delighted to see her like this. This was the legendary, falling asleep as soon as she touched the book. The person in charge of the library was actually someone who slept with books every day. It was somewhat different from his impression. Boom! Renbachien spat out his drink when he saw that she was leaning against the table with her face. Librarian Lin was too much fun. He could watch her sleep for an entire afternoon. Ah! Lin Chaola covered her nose, and tears welled up in her eyes. When he realized that Renbachien was staring at him, he scratched his head in frustration. "Why can't I control my sleepiness?" Someone saw him again. Her fine black hair instantly turned into a bird's nest, just like Mei Chao who had gone mad. "What are you looking at? Haven't you seen people doze off before?" Lin Chaola was going crazy. Renbachien held back his laughter, turned his head away, and silently added that there weren't many people who would use their faces to smash the table, especially when their faces were covered in saliva. After 3 to 4 minutes, Renbachien reckoned that the other party had cleaned up. He turned his head and saw her pouting in a daze. When she realized that Renbachien was looking at her, she immediately turned her head to the other side. The temperament of a little girl, Renbachien thought to himself. Renbochin was even more curious about how she managed to get her hands on the ancient books and records here. "Librarian Lin, can you read?" Renbochin asked. "Of course." Lin Chala raised her head like a proud hen. "Can you teach me how to read?" Renbochin laughed. He didn't know how long he would have to travel between these two worlds. He couldn't possibly be illiterate forever, right? There were so many books here. After he learned the words here, he could look for some books to read. Maybe there would be something he was interested in. "You can't read?" Lin Chala widened her eyes in astonishment. The storyteller of Qingshin Palace Hall was actually illiterate. This was simply the biggest joke. Renbochin spread his hands and said, "I really can't read. Can you teach me?" "No." Lin Chala turned her head away again. Renbochin chuckled. He reckoned that Lin Chala, who had the temperament of a little girl, was inexplicably resentful. Let's talk about it when she forgets about it. Anyway, this matter was not urgent. After staying there for about an hour, two maids came in with cleaning tools. They cupped their fists and greeted Lin Chala, "Librarian Lin." It seemed like the common etiquette in Deo was to cup one's fist in salute. Regardless of gender, they would only go down on one knee when they saw the emperor. Lin Chala kept a straight face and nodded at the two maids. The two of them looked at Renbochin curiously and went in to clean up. Just as the two of them entered, an imperial guard came to the door and asked, "Is the storyteller of Qingshin Palace Hall here?" "Yes, I am." Renbochin immediately jumped up from the ground, patted the non-existent dust off his butt, and walked forward. "Her Majesty is looking for you," the imperial guard said and led him out. Renbochin initially thought that he would return to the palace hall, but after making a few detours, he realized that the route was not right. The sound of an unknown musical instrument could be heard from afar. The sound was desolate and distant, and it gave people the feeling that it was full of simplicity and nature, just like the name of the Aboriginals. Following the sound of this musical instrument, they finally arrived at a garden. The garden was filled with exotic flowers and plants that competed with each other in beauty. There were also some trees that weren't very tall. It wasn't as exquisite as the gardens in China. The flowers and plants here were a little messy, but it was full of vitality. A river that wasn't considered deep flowed through the garden, and there was a stone bridge over it. Not far from the stone bridge, the Empress, who was dressed in red, was sitting in a pavilion. Beside her, there was a woman playing an unknown musical instrument. Qing Yuan and Hong Luan were standing not far away. No matter where the Empress was, she would always have these two people by her side. This made Renbochin realize that he could offend anyone in the palace except for the Empress and these two people. These two people were the so-called close officials. There were no eunuchs in Deo's palace, only female officials, maids, and imperial guards. These two people were definitely the most trusted aides of the Empress. "Greetings, Your Majesty," Renbochin said as he knelt on one knee near the Empress. "You are a fast learner." The Empress shifted her gaze to Renbochin. Following which, she was slightly stunned. Her eyebrows were raised at first, then slowly lowered. "How did you get yourself into such a sorry state?" The Empress's cold voice sounded. "I was careless in the afternoon." "Please forgive me, Your Majesty," Renbochin quickly replied. "Even though Deo doesn't place as much emphasis on style as Great Xia, but since you are now an official, you have to be more careful. If I see you in such a state again, you will definitely suffer." It was rare for the Empress to say a few more words, but it made Renbochin break out in a cold sweat. "Yes, I know my mistake," Renbochin quickly replied. In his heart, he was cursing those fellows in the Beast Park. If it wasn't for them, he wouldn't have ended up in such a state. The Empress frowned slightly. "Where did you learn to say this from?" Renbochin laughed dryly. He couldn't possibly say that he learned it from television, so he could only say, "It's like this in China." "Have you been an official in China before?" the Empress asked faintly. Renbochan had never been a class monitor since he was young, let alone an official. In his heart, he was wondering if he should brag or something. In any case, there was no way to verify it. However, when he raised his head and saw the Empress's cold eyes, he immediately became terrified. He swallowed the words that were at the tip of his tongue and shook his head. "I have never been an official," he muttered in his heart. Her eyes were really too sharp. It was as if she could directly see through his heart. He didn't dare to lie even though he was already at the tip of his tongue. "Continue with your story," the Empress leaned back slightly and said. Renbochan cleared his throat. Narrating the investiture of the gods with this bleak music gave him a special feeling. When he reached the part where the emperor wanted the minister to die, he didn't dare to not die. The Empress asked, "Is China like this?" Renbochan thought for a while and carefully replied, "There's another saying in China, water can carry a boat, but it can also capsize it." The Empress repeated this saying, pondered for a while, and nodded, "That makes some sense. The emperor of a country should take care of his own people. If his people can't even eat, what's the use of being the emperor? Naturally, his people will rebel." He had to admit that the Empress was indeed very intelligent. Even though she had never heard of such words before, she could immediately understand the meaning behind it. Chapter 61. Thanks to Piss All Over 01, Tale of Dreams, Brother Hay of the Tujia family, and to the other readers who voted to comment in the book review and comment section. In fact, this book was prepared to be updated after it was published, but now that there are 3 branch chiefs, I have to express my gratitude. Thank you, everyone. The Empress waved her hand, stood up, and gazed into the distance in the pavilion. After a while, she said, "However, there are some people who will always have different ideas no matter how you treat them. What do you think we should do with such people?" Renbochan thought to himself that the Empress wasn't talking about him, right? He didn't have any messy ideas. It sounded more like she was talking about the remnant citizens of the Hao nation. But, what did the Empress mean by saying this? Was she testing him? The person in front of him could pinch him to death with one hand. This wasn't an adjective. Renbochan had no choice but to be careful. He didn't want to be meritorious, but he wanted to avoid making mistakes. After sorting out his words, Renbochan cautiously said, "I feel that we should assimilate them and let them have a sense of identity with their country. This way, some people may not be able to change and may have other ideas, especially those who are older. However, the new generation can identify with the country from a young age. After they grow up, the situation will change." After Renbochan finished speaking, the Empress turned to face him without saying anything. He didn't know what she was thinking. Apart from the sound of the musical instrument, there was nothing else. Just when Renbochan was wondering if what he said didn't suit her, the Empress turned around and said coldly, "If I say so, all of them will be beheaded." Although the Empress didn't do anything else, her expression and words still made Renbochan feel cold and subconsciously shrunk his neck. The Empress sat back in her original position and said, "If it wasn't for the late emperor, I would have beheaded them. However, what you said is quite interesting. Tell me in detail." Renbochan was now sure that the Empress was talking about the remnant citizens of the Hao nation. Although he didn't know why the Empress asked him, he still racked his brains and sorted out the things in his mind and listed them in 1, 2, 3, 4. To put it bluntly, it was the patriotism education. Regular lectures on patriotism, such as remembering the bitterness and sweetness of life, the 8 honors and 8 disgraces, would be lectured to them and required to memorize them. If there were conditions, it would be best to arrange for people to teach them in their private schools. They had to learn. At the same time, the culture and traditions of the Aboriginals were passed on to them, and the cultures of both sides merged. In the end, both sides lived together. Now, they were confined to a small circle and did not know much about the Aboriginals. Every day, they came into contact with the remnants of the How Nation. Furthermore, the Aboriginals had destroyed the nation. In the long run, they would naturally be surrounded by resentment. If both parties were to live together, the other party would see that there was nothing wrong with the Aboriginals other than their strength. Furthermore, the Aboriginals were simple and honest. Naturally, they would be less prejudiced against them. After all, most of the people were simple and honest, no matter where they were. In reality, most of them were ambitious people. They were unwilling to accept the current situation, but they could not see the path to advancement. Naturally, they would have all kinds of ideas. If a certain number of official positions were opened up and they were allowed to enter the imperial court, in order to protect their own positions, they would suppress those who were disloyal. Step by step, this was patriotism, education, division, and suppression. It was basically a method that had been used on Earth over and over again. The Empress quietly listened to what Rinpochen had to say. After he finished speaking, she remained silent for a long time before saying, "Continue with your story." Rinpochen could not read minds and naturally did not know what she was thinking. However, he guessed that she was probably considering the feasibility of this plan. Rinpochen felt that if she really wanted to do it, this plan was quite feasible. After all, it had already been proven on Earth. As long as it was adjusted according to the situation in Deo, it would be fine. If this method did not work, Rinpochen had a more ruthless method. However, he was afraid that he would train a bunch of pyramid schemers. He now felt that he was like the henchman of the villain in a movie, helping to come up with all kinds of bad ideas. This was especially true for the remnants of the How Nation. However, it was not without benefits for them. At the very least, they would be less scheming in private. This was to prevent the Empress in front of them from saying, "Behead," when she was in a bad mood. At that time, there would really be heads rolling. When Rinpochen continued to talk about how the demon fox transformed into Daji and entered the palace, the Empress was absent-minded. However, Qin Yuan and Hong Yuan were engrossed in listening. When he talked about how Yun Zhongzi went down the mountain, the Empress then focused on the story. This kind of fairy tale was quite attractive to her. When he said, "If the emperor treats his subjects like brothers, then the subjects will treat the emperor like confidants. If the emperor treats his subjects like dirt, then the subjects will treat the emperor like bandits." The Empress was slightly enlightened. "These words of yours from China do make some sense." The Empress nodded. The principles of the world are interconnected. It is the same everywhere, Rinpochen said. That is not necessarily true. The Empress suddenly sneered. Rinpochen did not know if he had said something wrong. When Rinpochen talked about Fei Zhong's scheme to depose Empress Jiang, someone came to inform the Empress that it was time for dinner. "That's all for today. Go back and tidy up. Don't do this again tomorrow." The Empress stood up and said, "Yes." Rinpochen made up his mind to find someone to change his clothes and wash them quickly. "Your Majesty." Rinpochen saw that the Empress was about to leave and quickly called out, "Is there anything else?" The Empress turned sideways and looked at him. "I would like to ask, what is my official position?" Rinpochen was a little embarrassed. "Just do what you are doing now," the Empress said. She then left with Qin Yuan and Hong Yuan. The musician also started to pack his instruments. After the Empress left, Rinpochen smiled bitterly. It seemed like he was really a storyteller. However, this was also good. He still did not understand many aspects of Deo. If he was asked to do something else, he would not be able to do it. This was not Earth. If he made any mistakes, he would at most be scolded or fined. Renbochin followed the original route according to his memory and only found the way out of the palace when he was about to reach Qingshin Palace Hall. When he returned, he took off his clothes and found someone to change them. He lay on the bed and immediately felt a little tired. His mind was mostly thinking about the Empress's reaction at that time and guessing what she was thinking. Those remnant citizens of the Hao nation seemed to be very annoyed by the Empress. If not for the previous emperor's order, she would have killed them all. He did not know if his words could change the other party's mind and make her change her mind. After thinking about it, he felt that he had nothing better to do. He did not know what to do now. He had just become a storyteller in Qingshin Palace Hall and was actually worried about the life and death of 20 million people. These things should be left to the Empress and those people in the imperial court to consider. He should first learn the words here and read more books when he had nothing to do. He should understand the situation of this world first. Maslow's hierarchy of needs categorized human needs from low to high as physiological needs, safety needs, social needs, respect needs, and self-actualization needs. Chapter 62. The next morning, Renbochin tried on the clothes that he had just washed and dried. It was not bad. Even though there was no mirror, he could feel that it fit his body. The one helping to change the clothes was the wife of an odd job worker. Her skills were quite good. After trying on the clothes, Renbochin changed them so that those heartless fellows wouldn't leave claw marks all over his body. He didn't know when they would send him a change of official robes. Since he had nothing to do, he chatted with Tinghulu and Tai Dao and listened to them talk about the military counselor. Renbochin didn't chase after celebrity since kindergarten because it was too childish. Now, he worshipped the military counselor like a fan. He would even listen to stories about the military counselor with great interest. There were many intelligent people in history, and many of them were famous. However, there weren't many like him. It was a pity that the two of them didn't know his name. They only knew that his surname was Qi. It seemed that very few people mentioned his name at that time. As a result, not many people knew his name now. It was said that there was a portrait of him in the palace. It was drawn by an aboriginal who was very artistic. Renbochin really wanted to see what it looked like when he had the chance. Thinking of the scrolls and books in Qingshin Palace Hall, Renbochin felt that it was very likely there. After lunch, Renbochin changed his clothes and strolled into the palace. He showed the token in front of the door and allowed him to enter. Renbochin entered the palace and looked at the token in his hand. It seemed that the token was really useful. He could actually enter and exit the palace at will. A person of unknown origin like him could actually give this thing to him. However, thinking of the Empress's fighting strength, Renbochin felt that she wouldn't put him in her eyes. Even if he stuffed a knife into his hand, he wouldn't be able to defend himself. Along the way to Qingshin Palace Hall, Renbochin saw Lin Chaola sitting on the stone steps in front of the door. She was supporting her chin with her hand and her eyes were squinted. Renbochin couldn't figure out whether she was sleeping or not. Librarian Lin. Renbochin walked over to her and greeted her. Seeing that she didn't respond, he shook his head and didn't disturb her anymore. He let her be immersed in her dream. When he entered Qingshin Palace Hall, he saw another book on the table. This time, it was a book made of animal hide. He didn't know how long it had been there, but it looked rather old. Renbochin picked it up and flipped through it. There were only a few dozen words on each page, and each word was like a drawing. However, there were a few characters that were similar to Chinese characters, such as San, Ri, Yun, and Wang. He just didn't know if they had the same meaning. Interspersed in the middle were a few pictures of people performing various actions. Secret manuals of martial arts. Renbochin immediately thought of this and immediately became excited. Even if he couldn't become an expert like the Empress, it would still be good if he could strengthen his body. He didn't need to give way to anyone he saw when he went out. It was really damaging to a man's dignity that anyone could beat 8 of him with one hand. It was a pity that he couldn't recognize the words on it. Many of the words looked similar, and he couldn't even remember them. After a while, Renbochin helplessly placed the booklet back on the table. Looks like I'll have to wait until I learn how to read. When it was almost evening, Renbochin was called into the hall to tell a story. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly heard the Empress's voice, "Are you going to disappear again tomorrow?" Renbochin immediately broke out in a cold sweat. It was as if his body was petrified. He turned around with difficulty and forced a smile. "Your Majesty's eyes are like pearls, your foresight is like that of a deity, your wisdom is outstanding, your foresight is farsighted, and you have the pearl of wisdom in your hands." "I'm terrified, and I'm in awe. It's true that I'm terrified. As for the rest, it's hard to say," the Empress said coldly. "Forget it, I've said that as long as you do your best, I won't interfere. You may leave." After being beaten, Renbochin escaped from the palace as if he had been pardoned. After leaving the palace, he heaved a sigh of relief and wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. In just a short while, his back was drenched again. After going through the Empress's words in his mind, he was afraid that the words, "do my best," were what the Empress wanted to say. The matter of the salt well had to be put on the agenda as soon as possible. With the merits of the salt well and the sweet potatoes, his head would probably be more stable. Along the way, he lowered his head and walked while thinking. In the darkness, his head directly hit a wall and he took 2 steps back. When he looked up, he realized that the wall was Caretakershire. "What's wrong? You look absent-minded," Caretakershire asked, startling a flock of birds in the surroundings. Renbochin took another 2 steps back before he composed himself and said, "Nothing, I'm just thinking about something. How's the shaved ice shop?" Caretakershire immediately became happy when he mentioned this matter. He took 2 steps forward and almost slapped Renbochin to the ground. After that, he laughed heartily and said, "Brother Ren, you're awesome, ah. If we do as you say, the shop would be extremely busy for the next 2 days." Renbochin rubbed his shoulder and grimaced in pain. Just now, he wanted to dodge but failed. Caretakershire's movements were much faster than his. "As long as the business is good, it's good. However, don't slap me." Renbochin saw Caretakershire raise his palm again and hurriedly jumped far away like a rabbit. Caretakershire laughed a few more times. It was obvious that he was really happy. Caretakershire stretched out his palm and said, "These 2 days, we have been selling 1 to 200 bowls a day. It's a shop. A bowl cost 5 copper coins, so 1 million coins would be 5 taels of silver. In other words, they could earn 7 to 8 taels of silver a day, and the profit would be at least 60%. In other words, they could earn 4 to 5 taels of silver a day, and in a month, they would earn 100 taels of silver. As for the money for the shop and the labor, they did not have much left. After deducting them, they would have at least 80 taels of silver a month. The 2 shops added up to a total of 160 taels. If they split the profits, each person would get 80 taels. To Caretakershire, whose monthly salary was only 6 taels, it was equivalent to his annual salary. No wonder he was so happy. However, Renbochin's attention was completely focused on Caretakershire's palm. No matter how hard he racked his brains, he could not figure out how Caretakershire's 5 fingers had anything to do with 1 or 2. Were the people of Deo all like this? Just by gesturing a number, he would stretch out all 5 fingers? After listening to Caretakershire's words, Renbochin nodded his head slightly. Earning money was within his expectations. In fact, it was slightly less than what he had expected. After all, Deo was so hot. This kind of shaved ice would definitely sell well. Some of the people who sold ice cream on the pedestrian streets in China earned quite a lot in a month. Furthermore, the weather here was even hotter. Furthermore, this was an exclusive business. Renbochin reckoned that he would be able to sell more shaved ice cream after word of mouth spread. This would continue until the secret of saltpeter was discovered. Hire 2 more people. I reckon this business will last for a period of time, Renbochin said. I will listen to you. Now that he saw the money, Caretaker Shi was immediately filled with heroism. He would do whatever Renbochin said and was not worried at all. Chapter 63. When he woke up, he was back in his bedroom in China. When will it end? Renbochin rubbed his face and sat up from the bed. He did not need to worry about China anymore. A collaboration with the Qin family for the black mud cream recipe was enough for him to eat for the rest of his life. Now, he had to stabilize his position in Dayo. At the very least, he wouldn't lose his head one day. After sitting on the bed in a daze for a while, he saw that the sky had already started to brighten. He opened the window and a gust of cold wind blew in. It's getting colder, Renbochin muttered to himself. The time between the 2 sides was not equal. Basically, a round trip would take 12 days, and 3 trips would take more than a month. He only felt that 10 days had passed, but in reality, a month had passed. Therefore, he felt that the climate change was particularly abrupt. Another reason was that after returning from that world, he felt that the air in the city was especially turbid and had a pungent smell. This made him more and more reluctant to go out. After standing in front of the window in a daze for a while, Renbochin thought that it would be great if he could see the profits from the black mud cream earlier. At that time, he could buy a small island and live on it without having to endure this turbid air. However, he also knew that the black mud cream was destined to take a long time to reap results. 3 to 5 years was considered short. Not to mention the research and development of the drug and the subsequent experiments, just building a pharmaceutical factory from scratch was not a simple task. It seemed that he still had to think of ways to earn more money. Distant water cannot quench present thirst. After thinking about it, he realized that there wasn't anything that he could bring back to Dayo to make money from. Would he dare to sell pandas? Even he didn't dare to use the sharp-toothed tiger's skin. There was no such creature on Earth. The closest one was the sword-thorn tiger, which had gone extinct hundreds of millions of years ago. Basically, whatever they had on Earth, they didn't dare to take it out, or even if they did, they wouldn't have much value. He didn't dare to take out things that Earth didn't have. Unless it was something like a prescription, but the benefits were still too slow. He could earn about 80 taels of silver a month. Including the shop that was still under renovation, he could earn about 100 taels of silver, which was about 40 to 50,000 taels of silver. With the addition of the air cooler, he might be able to earn more. However, there seemed to be a risk in selling silver in large quantities over a long period of time. For an ordinary person, 400 to 500,000 yuan a year was a lot, but for the current Renbochin, it was like a drop in the bucket. Worrying about selling whey powder and earning money from selling cabbages. This was the kind of person who said this. Renbochin suddenly recalled that Dayo seemed to have a lot of gemstones. He wondered if he could find out more about them after he returned to Dayo. It would be more feasible to bring back some gems. It would be best if the quantity was small but the value was huge. After being in a daze for a while, Renbochin switched on his phone, which had been switched off all this while, to take a look. Just as he switched it on, a few missed calls and messages popped up. 2 from Chen Qing, 1 from Dong Hai Qing, 1 from Chen Bing, and 1 from his family. He dialed the number back, and as soon as the call connected, he heard someone scolding him. You still know how to call back. I called you, but your phone was turned off. I couldn't find you. If you didn't call me back, I would have called the police and reported you missing. Renbochin moved the phone away from his ear. After a long time, he waited for the person on the other side to finish scolding him before saying, "Recently, the company has been rather busy. I work overtime every day and didn't notice that my phone ran out of battery. I just finished my work today, so I called to greet you." "Oh, you even know how to use words." Renbochin's mother mumbled before asking, "How's the situation at the company?" "Very good, it's getting better and better." Renbochin changed to a relaxed tone. "Forget it, I don't know about those things. Today is the Mid-Autumn Festival, are you coming back? It's still not too late to take a taxi." "Today is the Mid-Autumn Festival?" Renbochin asked doubtfully. "Have you been living a stupid life? You don't even know the date." "Oh, I've been too busy recently and didn't notice. I'll set off now and we'll be back in the afternoon," Renbochin replied hurriedly. "That's more like it. Come back soon." After hanging up the phone, Renbochin heaved a sigh of relief. He felt that only a few days had passed. More than 2 months had passed. He had a look of resentment on his face. When was he going to end? However, after thinking about it, if he really transmigrated to that world and couldn't return, he didn't know how sad his family would be. Renbochin felt that the current situation wasn't too bad. Renbochin looked at Qingqing's missed calls and suddenly remembered that Qingqing's engagement date was approaching. It was a pity that he didn't have anything good to give him. Qingqing had money and didn't seem to lack anything. After thinking about it, Renbochin decided not to call him back. After washing up, he changed his clothes, went downstairs and drove home. Renbochin's hometown was about 300 kilometers away. He arrived at his neighborhood in the afternoon. Looking at the familiar but slightly dilapidated neighborhood, Renbochin felt an inexplicable sense of comfort. This was the feeling of home. "Brother, brother." Renbochin heard someone shouting and looked up. He saw his brother waving at him from the window. Renbochin smiled, locked his car, went upstairs, and knocked on the door. "Is the Audi downstairs yours?" Renbochin's father asked as soon as he opened the door. "Your eyesight is really good." Renbochin gave him a thumbs up. "Nonsense, it's not like you don't know that I have telescopic vision." Renbochin's father gave him a slap on the head. "Give me the keys, I'll go for a stroll." Renbochin smiled and threw the keys to his father. He knew that his father had always liked cars, but he had 2 children to support. After so many years, he had only bought a second-hand Alto to use as a means of transportation. Therefore, when he saw this car, he couldn't help but feel excited. "Look at you, it's just a car, what's so good about driving?" His mother's voice came from the kitchen. His father ignored her, took the keys, and rushed out excitedly. "Brother, do you have a gift for me?" Renbochin's brother surrounded him as soon as his father left. Renbochin's brother, Renwanyan, was in his 3rd year of high school this year. He was taller than him, more handsome, had good grades, and was cheerful. It seemed that all the good points of the family were concentrated on him. However, between the 2 brothers, one was Renbochin, and the other was Renwanyan. It could be seen that their parents had high expectations for them. Regarding this expectation, Renbochin only wanted to say, "I really can't do it. I'll buy you a mobile phone tomorrow." Renbochin looked at his brother's height and the fact that he could definitely rely on his looks to make a living. He couldn't help but feel envious and jealous. "Thank you, brother." Renwanyan immediately beamed with joy. Renbochin put down the things, went into the kitchen, and saw that they were all his favorite dishes. It seemed like they had just started cooking. It seemed that his mother had been preparing for the whole morning and was waiting for him to come home. She was afraid that he wouldn't be able to eat hot food. "Since you are back, go to one side and don't be a hindrance." His mother's words threw the little bit of warmth that had just risen in Renbachian's heart into the gutter. He touched his nose and went to sit on the sofa. Brother, what does your company do? Renwanyan moved to Renbachian's side and asked. Medicine. Medicine. Brother, when did you learn about this? Renwanyan asked curiously. Your brother knows a lot. Renbachian had a proud look on his face. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.